This video will help you sleep and relax. But before we begin, I would like to know which city you're from and what time you're watching this. Now, subscribe to the channel, relax, and let's begin. I've been debating for weeks whether to post this. Even now, my hands are shaking as I type. I guess I need to tell someone because the police didn't take me seriously, and I'm starting to question my own sanity. About 7 months ago, I moved to Willow Creek after breaking up with my ex. It was a messy situation, emotional manipulation, constant accusations, the works. I just needed somewhere quiet to rebuild my life. The neighborhood seemed perfect. Neat lawns, families with kids riding bikes, the occasional dog walker. My house was modest but comfortable, with this little office space on the 3rd floor that I converted into my home workspace. The weird thing about my property was how close the neighboring house was. While most homes in the area had decent space between them, this massive place next door was uncomfortably near, like whoever designed the lots didn't understand personal space. The house was enormous compared to the others on the street, at least 5 bedrooms, maybe more. During my first week, I decided to introduce myself to the neighbors. That's when I met Damon. He was probably in his early 30s, had this weird mullet hairstyle that somehow worked for him, and said he lived alone in that huge house. When I asked what he did for work, he just vaguely said finance and changed the subject. We exchanged numbers, and he seemed friendly enough, mentioning we should hang out sometime. But every time I texted to see if he wanted to grab a beer or watch a game, Damon always had some excuse. Working late, heading out of town, family emergency. After a while, I stopped trying. From my office window, I had a clear view of his driveway and part of his backyard. I wasn't trying to be creepy, but I started noticing weird things. His black Audi was always there, never moved. I never saw any food delivery people come by. No visitors, no packages. For someone who supposedly worked in finance and lived in this massive house, Damon seemed to exist, like a ghost. One Wednesday night, or I guess Thursday morning around 2 a.m., I woke up to loud music. At first, I thought it was my phone, but then realized it was coming from Damon's house. It was unusual because in the months I'd lived there, I'd never heard a peep from his place. Looking out my bedroom window, I saw several cars parked in his driveway and along the street, at least 6 or 7 vehicles. I tried going back to sleep, but the music kept getting louder. After tossing and turning for 20 minutes, I decided to go over and ask them to turn it down. I threw on a sweatshirt and jeans and walked over to his front door. I knocked several times, but nobody answered. The music was definitely coming from inside. I could hear people talking and laughing too. I knocked harder, thinking maybe they couldn't hear me over the noise. Still nothing. Then I noticed the door was slightly ajar. I hesitated, but figured I'd just poke my head in and try to get someone's attention. I pushed the door open and called out, "Hello, Damon?" This is where things get really weird. The foyer had about 10 pairs of shoes neatly lined up. Dress shoes, expensive-looking loafers, the kind businessmen wear. But as I stepped further inside, I realized something was off. I could hear the party sounds, people chatting, glasses clinking, music playing, but there was no one in sight. I followed the sound to the living room where I found speakers set up around the room. The party was a recording playing through a sound system. The room was immaculate. No drinks, no food, no people, just empty furniture and these speakers playing party sounds. I stood there completely confused. Why would Damon fake a party? And whose cars were outside if no one was here? I considered leaving, but curiosity got the better of me. I walked through the dining room, The kitchen, all empty and weirdly clean, like no one actually lived there. That's when I noticed a door at the end of the hallway that was partially open. A thin strip of light was coming from it. As I got closer, I realized it led to the basement. I heard mechanical sounds, like a grinding or whirring noise, coming from below. I'm not proud of what I did next, but I crept down a few steps of the basement stairs. The smell hit me first, strong, chemical, like industrial strength bleach but worse. The kind that burns your nostrils and makes your eyes water. The grinding sound was louder now, and I could hear men's voices murmuring, though I couldn't make out what they were saying. At the bottom of the stairs was another door, cracked open just enough that I could peer through. What I saw still haunts me. 3 older men, like in their 60s maybe, were wearing protective goggles, heavy-duty work clothes, and thick rubber gloves. They were gathered around something I couldn't quite see. One of them was operating some kind of machine that was making the grinding noise. The room was lined with plastic sheeting, like the kind used for painting or construction work. There were bright work lights set up on stands, illuminating whatever they were doing. I couldn't see past the men to what they were working on, but something about the scene filled me with absolute dread. I must have made a noise because one of the men suddenly looked toward the door. I didn't stick around to see if he spotted me. Pure fear took over, and I backed up the stairs as quietly as possible before turning and rushing out of the house. I didn't go out the front door, though. I was terrified of being seen by whoever owned those cars. Instead, I went out through a side door that led to the backyard. I crouched low and made my way across our adjoining yards back to my house. Once inside, I locked every door and window. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I went up to my office in the dark and looked out the window toward Damon's house. For about 20 minutes, nothing happened. Then the back door opened, and 8 older men came out. None of them was Damon. They had flashlights and were scanning the yard, obviously looking for something or someone. They seemed to be arguing, gesturing toward my house and the street. After a few minutes, they went back inside. I stayed awake all night, watching from my window. Around 4:30 in the morning, all of them left through the front door. They got into their cars and drove away, one by one. The last car to leave was Damon's Audi, but I couldn't see who was driving it. When morning came, I looked outside again. Every car was gone, including Damon's. The house looked quiet and normal, like nothing had happened. I tried asking other neighbors if they'd heard the party the night before, but everyone said they hadn't heard anything. One elderly woman mentioned she hadn't seen that nice young man, meaning Damon, in quite some time. Days turned into weeks, and Damon never returned. His lawn started growing too long. Packages would occasionally be delivered and just sit on his porch until someone from the postal service took them back. I thought about calling the police, but what would I say? My neighbor, who I barely knew, isn't home, and I illegally entered his house and saw some old guys doing something in his basement. About a month later, I finally worked up the courage to call the non-emergency police line. I told them my neighbor had been missing for weeks. They took a report, did a quick check of the house, and said there was no sign of foul play. They suggested he might have moved without telling anyone or gone on an extended trip. I didn't tell them what I'd seen that night. It sounded crazy, even to me. What would I have said? They were running a fake party recording to cover up whatever they were doing in the basement. I would have sounded insane. It's been months now. The house next door remains empty. Sometimes I think I see lights on inside late at night, but when I look again, it's dark. I've considered moving, but I can't afford to break my lease. Plus, A part of me feels like I need to know what happened. I've spent hours researching Damon online, trying to find out more about him. There's barely any trace that he existed. No social media accounts under his name. No property records showing he owned that house. It's like he was a ghost. The questions keep me up at night. What were those men doing in the basement? Why stage a fake party with recordings? And most terrifying of all, if those men were doing something sinister, then who was Damon really? Was he involved? Or did something happen to him too? I've installed extra security cameras and locks on my doors. I keep the blinds closed on the side facing Damon's house. Sometimes I think about going back over there to look for clues, but then I remember the fear I felt that night, the smell of chemicals, the sound of that grinding machine. And I remember those men searching the yard with flashlights, looking for whoever had intruded on their secret gathering. Whatever was happening in that house, I wasn't meant to see it. And I can't shake the feeling that someday they might come looking for the person who did. Story 2. I've always considered myself a pretty level-headed guy. Not much scares me, and I actually prefer solitude to crowds most days. That's why moving into that cabin last year seemed perfect. It was this rustic little place on the outskirts of Pisgah National Forest in North Carolina, about 4 miles down a winding dirt road from the nearest paved road. Total isolation, beautiful surroundings, dirt cheap rent. What more could I want? My roommate Drew and I found it on some obscure rental site. The listing said authentic wilderness experience and completely off-grid living. The owner, this older guy named Martin, seemed pretty intense about keeping the place primitive. No electricity, just a gas generator we could run for a few hours, wood stove for heat, well water that needed to be hand pumped. I was actually into all that. After 5 years working IT in Charlotte with fluorescent lights and recycled air, I needed something real. When we first toured the place, I noticed something odd right away. There weren't any locks on the doors, not broken locks, just no locks at all. Just a simple wooden latch that wouldn't keep out a determined child, let alone an adult. When I asked Martin about it, he got this weird look on his face. Part of the authentic experience, he said. This cabin's been standing since 1932 without locks. People out here respect each other's property. Drew thought it was hilarious. Dude, we're 4 miles from civilization through dense forest. Nobody's trudging out here to steal your PlayStation. Easy for him to say. He grew up in Manhattan, where everything has 3 deadbolts and a doorman. I grew up in rural Georgia, where you still lock your doors because remote places attract people who don't want to be seen. Still, the rent was so cheap and the place so perfect otherwise that I agreed to take it. We moved in during early September, right as the leaves were starting to turn. For the first couple weeks, everything was perfect. I'd wake up with the sun, hike during the day, read by lantern light at night. Drew would drive into town for his remote work meetings when he needed internet. We were living the dream. Then I started noticing things. Small things at first. It began with sounds at night. Not the normal forest sounds. I'd already gotten used to those. The wind through pine needles, owls hooting, the occasional scurrying of small animals. These were different, deliberate. Footsteps, slow, careful footsteps crunching through the underbrush around our cabin. The first night I heard them, I figured it was just a deer or maybe a black bear. Animals are common out there, but animals don't move like that, with such slow, methodical precision. They don't stop when you make a noise. then start again when you're quiet, like they're timing their movements to yours. By the third night of hearing them, I knew something was wrong. The pattern was impossible to ignore. The footsteps would start far off, barely audible. Then, they'd move with slow deliberation toward the cabin, stopping about 50 yards away in the densest part of the foliage where you couldn't possibly see anything from our windows. Then the breathing would start. Deep, heavy breathing that didn't sound like any forest animal I'd ever heard. It had this wheeze to it, a slight rattle that made the hair on my arms stand up. Sometimes it would stay there, just breathing, for minutes. Other times, nearly an hour. I tried to tell Drew about it, but he's a heavy sleeper and never heard anything. It's just forest sounds, man. Your brain is trying to create patterns where there aren't any. But I knew what I was hearing, and I started feeling it during the day too. This constant sensation of being watched. I'd be chopping wood or walking to the outhouse, and the feeling would hit me like a physical weight. The forest that had seemed so peaceful now felt suffocating. The trees cast longer shadows. The bird sounds seemed to stop at odd times, creating these pockets of unnatural silence. Every time I went outside, I felt that prickling sensation on the back of my neck. You know that feeling, when you know someone's eyes are on you. The unlocked door started to become an obsession. I'd lie awake at night staring at that flimsy wooden latch, imagining how easily someone could just push it open. I started propping a chair under the handle at night. Drew laughed when he saw it. Seriously? What do you think is out there? Bigfoot? I couldn't explain it to him. How do you describe that certainty that something is wrong when you have no evidence besides sounds that only you hear? By week 4, the footsteps were coming every night. I started sleeping in my car, parking about an acre away from the cabin where there was a small clearing. I'd recline the seat, keep the keys in the ignition, and try to sleep. Drew thought I was losing it. Jackson, you need to get a grip. There's nothing out there. But there was. Because even when I slept in my car, the footsteps found me. I'd hear them start at the cabin, then gradually work their way toward wherever I'd parked. Some nights I'd drive to different spots, thinking maybe I could throw off whatever was stalking me. It never worked. It always found me. The breaking point came on a Tuesday night, 47 days after we'd moved in. It was about 2 in the morning. I was half asleep in my car, parked in a different spot than usual when I heard it. Footsteps, but not starting far away this time. They were already close, too close. I froze, every muscle in my body tense. The footsteps were deliberate, moving in a slow circle around my car. Then they stopped right outside my driver's side window. I could hear that breathing, that awful, wheezing breath, just inches from where I lay. A twig snapped, and something bumped against the car door. That slight metallic vibration ran through the whole vehicle. I was paralyzed, afraid even to turn my head to look out the window. What if there was a face right there, staring in at me? I don't know how long I lay there, but eventually I worked up the courage to fumble for my keys. With shaking hands, I turned on the headlights, flooding the area with light. Nothing. There was nothing there that I could see, but I knew something had been there. The feeling was too real, the sounds too clear. I threw the car into reverse and backed up so fast I nearly hit a tree. I didn't stop until I reached the main road, where I parked at a 24-hour gas station and waited for dawn. When morning came, I drove back to the cabin and packed everything I owned. Drew thought I was having some kind of breakdown. You can't just leave, because you're spooked by some forest noises, he said, watching me throw clothes into bags. I'm not staying another night in that place, I told him. And if you're smart, you won't either. He laughed it off. Drew was always the rational one, the one who needed evidence. The rent's too good to pass up. Besides, there's nothing out there but squirrels and maybe the occasional hiker. I left that afternoon and never went back. Found a small apartment in Asheville and tried to forget about the whole experience. Told myself maybe Drew was right. Maybe I had just worked myself up over nothing. Then, 3 weeks later, Drew called me. His voice sounded different, tight, shaky. "Someone broke in last night," he said without preamble. I woke up and all the cabinets were open. My laptop was gone. I wanted to say I told you so, but the fear in his voice stopped me. "Are you okay? Did you call the police?" "Yeah, they came out, but there wasn't much they could do. No fingerprints, no evidence. They said it was probably just local kids." I knew better. "Drew, you need to get out of there." He didn't listen. Said he'd just been careless, left a window unlatched. He bought some battery-powered alarms for the windows and doors. A week later, it happened again. This time, whoever broke in took nothing, but Drew woke up to find his clothes from the dresser laid out on the floor in a perfect circle. He called me at 6 in the morning, voice cracking. "I'm leaving today," he said, "but I'm setting up motion sensor cameras first. I need to know what's happening." I tried to talk him out of it. "Just leave," I said, but he was determined. Drew always needed proof, needed to understand. He installed 3 trail cameras around the property that would send alerts to his phone. Then he checked into a motel in town to wait. The first night, nothing happened. The second night, too. On the third night, at exactly 1:46 in the morning, all 3 cameras triggered within seconds of each other. Drew forwarded me the images before he even called. I still have them saved on my phone, though I wish I could unsee them. 3 different angles of the same thing. A tall, gaunt man wearing what looked like old hunting clothes, standing absolutely still at the tree line. In his hands was a long rifle, old-fashioned looking, pointed at the ground. But it was his face that haunts me, pale, deeply lined, with dark hollows for eyes and this terrible knowing smile. In the second set of images, captured about 20 minutes later, he was standing right outside my old bedroom window, peering in. Drew never went back to collect the cameras. He broke the lease, forfeited the deposit, and moved back to New York within a week. Martin, the owner, acted surprised when Drew told him why we were leaving, but there was something off about his reaction, like he was performing surprise rather than feeling it. I did some digging after that. Found out Martin had rented that cabin to at least 6 different tenants in the past 3 years. None stayed longer than 2 months. The local sheriff's office had reports of prowlers and break-ins at that address going back decades, but no one was ever caught. I still think about those footsteps sometimes, about that wheezing breath outside my car window. I think about how many nights that man might have stood watching us through our windows while we slept, testing the unlocked door, deciding when to come in. I think about what might have happened if I'd stayed. I'm in a new city now, in an apartment building with 3 locks on my door and security cameras in the hallway. But sometimes I still wake up in the middle of the night, convinced I can hear footsteps outside my door. And sometimes, just as I'm drifting off to sleep, I swear I can hear that wheezing breath, waiting patiently for me to let my guard down. Story 3. I was just a kid, but my older brother Mikhail was a teenager during the worst of it, the late 80s and early 90s. He's 7 years older than me, so while I was playing with toys, he was already running the streets with his friends. Our parents worked constantly, trying to keep us fed, so Mikhail basically raised himself. He never talked much about those days until recently. We were drinking at my apartment last month when he suddenly started telling me about something that happened to him when he was 14. I'd never seen my brother look scared before, but the memory still shook him almost 30 years later. Back then, Mikhail and his friends spent most of their free time exploring abandoned buildings. Moscow was full of them, half-constructed apartment blocks the government ran out of money to finish, old factories shut down when the economy collapsed, empty office buildings. These places were dangerous. Floors would cave in, stairs were missing. There was broken glass and exposed wiring everywhere. But that was part of the appeal. No adults, no rules. Mikhail and his friends, Sergei, Alexei, and Dmitry, had a favorite spot they called the Monster. It was this massive concrete skeleton of what was supposed to be some government building, abandoned mid-construction when the funding dried up. 5 stories of concrete, no windows, no doors, just endless open rooms and hallways. The perfect playground for teenage boys. They'd go there to smoke cigarettes they'd stolen from their parents, light small fires in metal drums to keep warm, and throw rocks at bottles they'd set up as targets. Sometimes they'd find homeless people or other kids, but mostly it was empty. They knew every corner of that building, which staircases were safe, which floors to avoid, where the best hiding spots were. It was early spring, still cold in Moscow. Mikhail remembers because they were all wearing their winter jackets, but the snow had mostly melted. They'd been at the Monster for a couple hours that day, just messing around on the 3rd floor. Sergei had found an old metal chair, and they were taking turns throwing rocks at it from across the room. Just stupid kid stuff. Mikhail said he felt something was off before he actually saw anything. The building had a certain echo to it, and suddenly the sounds changed. Someone else was there. They weren't worried at first. Probably just another group of kids, or maybe a homeless person looking for shelter. But then Alexei froze and nodded toward the doorway at the end of the room. A man was standing there just watching them. Mikhail said this wasn't totally unusual. Sometimes adults would yell at them to leave or threaten to call the police. But something about this guy was immediately different. He was tall, completely bald, and clean. That's what stood out most. In a filthy, crumbling building covered in dust and graffiti, this guy looked like he'd just stepped out of a shower. He wore a long black coat, not a Soviet-style coat, but something foreign and expensive looking. And his shoes. Mikhail specifically remembered his shoes because they seemed so out of place. Bright white American sneakers, the kind you'd see in magazines, but almost nobody had in Russia back then. The man didn't say anything at first. He just stood there, watching them throw rocks. When the boys noticed him, they stopped, not sure what to do. In those days, you learned to be cautious around strange adults. The economy had made people desperate, and kids disappeared sometimes. After what felt like forever, the man finally spoke. Mikhail remembers his exact words. "Like my shoes? I have more. Come on, I'll show you." It wasn't what he said that bothered Mikhail and his friends. It was how he said it. There was no warmth in his voice, no attempt to sound friendly or trustworthy. Just cold, empty words. His face didn't match his offer either. No smile, no expression at all. Just dead eyes staring at them. The boys exchanged looks, not sure what to do. But then the man shifted his weight slightly, and his coat opened just enough for Mikhail to see something tucked into his waistband, the unmistakable shape of a pistol. Mikhail didn't say anything. He didn't need to. Something passed between him and his friends. That instant understanding that comes from spending every day together. They all saw it. They all knew. Sergei reacted first, throwing the rock he was holding through a broken window behind them. The crash seemed to break the spell, and all 4 boys bolted toward the back exit. They knew this building better than anyone, which probably saved their lives. They sprinted down a hallway filled with construction debris, leaping over broken concrete blocks and ducking under hanging wires. Behind them, they heard the man yell something, but Mikhail couldn't make out the words through the blood pounding in his ears. The boys reached a section where the floor had partially collapsed. It was a risky jump to the other side, but they'd done it dozens of times before. One by one, they leaped across the gap and continued running. Mikhail, who was last, swears he heard footsteps behind them, but he didn't look back. They reached the emergency stairwell, a narrow concrete shaft with metal stairs that descended in sharp zigzags. It was their fastest way down, but also dangerous. Several steps were missing, and there was no railing on the outer edge. One misstep meant a 3-story fall to the concrete below. They flew down those stairs, jumping over the gaps they knew by heart. At one point, Dmitri slipped and nearly fell, but Alexei grabbed his jacket and yanked him back. They didn't slow down. When they reached the ground floor, they burst through an opening where a door should have been and kept running. They didn't stop until they were several blocks away, ducking into the busy market area where crowds of people were buying and selling goods. They collapsed behind a row of kiosks, gasping for breath. Nobody spoke for several minutes. Finally, Sergei asked if anyone thought the man had followed them. Nobody had seen him after they started running. They argued about what to do. Alexei wanted to tell the police, but the rest laughed at him. In those days, the police were useless at best and dangerous at worst. Nobody trusted them. Eventually, they decided to just stay away from the monster for a while. They made a pact not to tell their parents, knowing they'd just get in trouble for being in abandoned buildings in the first place. Life went on. For about 2 weeks, they found other places to hang out. Then one day on their way to school, they noticed police cars surrounding the monster. Yellow tape blocked all the entrances, and officers were going in and out. They tried to look casual as they walked past, but Mikhail noticed how adults were whispering to each other, their faces grim. That night, he overheard his parents talking in hushed tones in the kitchen. Something about a body being found, a child. His mother was crying. When they noticed him listening, they sent him to his room without explaining. Rumors spread through the neighborhood. A boy had been found dead in the monster. Nobody knew exactly what happened, but people said he'd been beaten to death with a rock. He was only 10 years old. Mikhail and his friends never discussed whether it might be connected to the man they'd seen. They didn't need to. They all knew. But they never spoke about it, not even among themselves. They found new places to hang out, and eventually they grew up and went their separate ways. It wasn't until years later, when Mikhail was in university, that he learned more details. He ran into a guy whose father had been a police investigator. After a few drinks, the guy told him about an unsolved case his father had worked on, a serial killer who had targeted children in Moscow during the early 90s. At least 3 boys had been found beaten to death in abandoned buildings. They had all been lured away with promises of American goods, sneakers, jean jackets, things that were rare and coveted in post-Soviet Russia. The police had a description from a witness who'd seen one of the victims with a tall, bald man in a black coat. They even had a crude sketch, but they never caught him. The killings eventually stopped, either because the killer moved elsewhere or found some other outlet for his darkness. When Mikhail finished telling me all this, he went quiet for a long time. Then he said something I can't get out of my head. He said they weren't brave that day. They were just lucky. They ran because some animal instinct took over, because something primitive in their brains recognized the predator standing before them. Another child, one who hesitated for just a moment, wasn't so fortunate. I asked Mikhail if he ever told the police what he knew, even years later. He shook his head. By the time he understood what had happened, years had passed. The case was cold. What could he have added? That he and his friends had seen a man with white sneakers? That they'd had a bad feeling? Besides, he said, part of him was afraid the man was still out there somewhere, still watching, still waiting, still wearing those impossibly clean white shoes. I don't know why Mikhail chose that moment to tell me this story after keeping it to himself for so long. Maybe he needed to finally share the weight of it with someone. Maybe he's getting older and thinking more about the past. Or maybe he's worried that man is still out there and someone needs to remember what happened. I think about that man sometimes, how he must have watched those buildings, learning which ones kids frequented, how he studied their patterns and habits, how he picked his victims, how close my brother came to being one of them. Mostly I think about those white shoes, how clean they were in such a filthy place, how out of place, how wrong. I think that's what saved my brother's life, not the gun he glimpsed, but those pristine white sneakers that didn't belong in that world. Sometimes the smallest details are the ones that trigger our survival instincts. I don't know if they ever caught him. I've searched online for information about those cases, but there's very little available from that era. It was a chaotic time, and record-keeping was spotty at best. For all I know, he simply moved to another city, another country, and continued his hunt elsewhere. Or maybe he's still in Moscow, older now, but still watching, still wearing clean shoes in dirty places, still waiting for children who don't run fast enough. Story 4. I still don't like talking about that day. Even typing this makes my hands sweat. It's been 3 years since it happened, but I still wake up sometimes with my heart racing, thinking I'm back in that place. I need to get this out, though. Maybe someone here has experienced something similar. I was in my junior year at Oak Ridge Community College, sharing an apartment with 2 buddies, Jason and Andrew. Life was pretty normal back then. Classes, part-time jobs, weekend hangs. Nothing special about our Rust Belt town. Just another dying Midwest place where the factories closed down years ago and never came back. That weekend was rare because all 3 of us had time off together. No work shifts, no family obligations, just free time. We were bored with our usual hiking spots, and Andrew mentioned something his co-worker had told him about. There's this abandoned factory on the edge of town, he said while we were eating pizza in our cramped living room. Tommy from work said it's massive inside. Apparently people go there sometimes to take photos and stuff. Jason was immediately into it. Hell yeah, urban exploration. I've always wanted to try that. I was hesitant. Breaking into abandoned buildings seemed like asking for trouble, but I didn't want to be the buzzkill. Plus, I was curious too. Those massive old industrial buildings have always had this eerie draw to them. It's not really breaking in if no one cares about the place anymore, Andrew argued. So Saturday afternoon, we piled into Jason's beat-up Honda and drove to the outskirts of Oak Ridge. The GPS took us down these increasingly empty streets until we hit this industrial zone that felt completely dead. Like seriously, not a single car or person anywhere. Just crumbling concrete, faded signs, and weeds pushing through the pavement. When we finally saw it, I felt this weird chill. The factory was absolutely enormous, like a giant concrete and metal box stretching across an entire block. Most of the windows were broken, and there was graffiti covering the lower walls. A chain-link fence with barbed wire surrounded it, but we quickly found a section where someone had cut through. "See? People come here all the time," Andrew said, pointing to the gap in the fence. It was around 4 in the afternoon when we squeezed through. The sun was still up, but the clouds made everything gray and dull. We each had cheap flashlights from the dollar store because Andrew had said parts of the interior would be dark. The main entrance was this massive loading dock area with huge sliding doors that were partially open. As we approached, I remember noticing how quiet everything was. No birds, no distant traffic sounds, nothing. Just the wind making the metal parts of the building creak. "This place is epic," Jason whispered, pulling out his phone to take pictures. The inside of the factory was like something from a post-apocalyptic movie. The main floor was this cavernous space filled with rusted machinery, huge metal contraptions I couldn't identify, conveyor belts frozen in time, control panels with broken gauges. Debris was everywhere. Broken glass, pieces of ceiling, empty spray paint cans from graffiti artists. Our flashlights barely cut through the darkness, creating these long shadows that seemed to move when we weren't looking directly at them. The air smelled like rust, mold, and something else I couldn't place. Something almost chemical. We stayed together at first, moving through the maze of equipment, taking pictures and pointing out the more interesting graffiti. Some of it was really elaborate, full murals covering walls. Other spots had these weird symbols that none of us recognized. About half an hour in, we split up slightly. Not far, just exploring different corners of the same huge room. I was checking out this massive machine that looked like some kind of press when I noticed what I thought was Andrew standing by another piece of equipment about 30 feet away. I could only see a silhouette in the shadows, but the height and build looked like Andrew. I figured he was examining something interesting, so I decided to explore a bit further on my own. There was a metal door at the far end of the room that was partially open. "I'm going to check out what's through here," I called out, not waiting for a response. I assumed they could hear me. I pushed through the door, and it was heavier than I expected. It started slowly swinging closed behind me as I stepped into a long hallway lined with smaller rooms. My flashlight beam bounced off the concrete walls, which were mostly clean of graffiti here. That struck me as odd. Like other explorers hadn't ventured this far in. Just as the door was about to close, I heard footsteps approaching quickly from the main room. I figured one of my friends was following me, so I continued forward. The hallway opened into another large space, smaller than the main floor but still substantial. More machinery here, but arranged differently, creating these narrow passages you had to squeeze through. The floor in this room was strange. In some areas, there were piles of what looked like cat litter or some kind of absorbent material. I remember thinking it was weird, like someone had been cleaning up spills recently. There were also these small mounds of what looked like bedding in the corners, old blankets and newspapers. I heard the door open and close behind me, but didn't turn around immediately. "Pretty weird back here, right?" I said, assuming it was Jason or Andrew. No answer. "Guys?" I turned, pointing my flashlight toward the entrance. Nobody was there. That was the first moment I felt real unease. I figured they were messing with me, so I called out again, louder this time. "Very funny, come on out." Nothing. I decided to head back to the main room. Maybe they hadn't followed me after all, and I'd just imagined the door opening. As I turned back toward the hallway, my flashlight flickered briefly, just for a second, but enough to make my heart rate spike. When I reached the hallway door, I pushed it open and shined my light down the corridor. Empty. I took a few steps forward, and that's when I heard a small sound behind me, like something soft dragging across the concrete floor. I spun around, my flashlight beam jerking wildly until it landed on a figure standing about 15 feet away. It wasn't Jason or Andrew. It was a man I'd never seen before. He was tall and gaunt, with long stringy hair and a patchy beard. His clothes were filthy and torn, layers of them, like he was wearing everything he owned. But it was his eyes that made my blood turn cold. They were deeply sunken, almost black in the harsh flashlight beam, and they were fixed directly on me. He was moving toward me, not running, but walking with this weird, determined gait. His mouth was partially open, and I could hear his breathing, raspy and quick. I don't remember deciding to run. My body just moved. I bolted down the hallway toward the main room, my flashlight beam bouncing wildly. I could hear him behind me, moving faster now. When I reached the door to the main room, I shoved through it and then turned to slam it shut. Just before it closed, I caught a glimpse of his face much closer now. Those empty eyes, teeth bared in what might have been a smile. I held the door shut, feeling it push from the other side. There was no lock, so I braced myself against it, panic making it hard to breathe. "Jason! Andrew!" I screamed at the top of my lungs. The pressure on the door stopped suddenly. I stayed there for maybe 30 seconds, back against the metal, trying to figure out what to do. Then I heard Jason's voice from across the main floor. "Michael, where are you, man?" "I'm by the back door. There's someone else in here," I yelled, my voice cracking. I saw flashlight beams moving toward me through the machinery. Jason and Andrew appeared, looking confused. "What are you talking about?" Andrew asked, approaching cautiously. "There's a guy back there, like a homeless guy or something. He came after me." I was still pressing against the door, terrified it would fly open at any moment. Jason looked skeptical. "Are you sure you're not just freaking yourself out?" As if in response, there was a loud bang against the door behind me. All three of us jumped. Andrew's flashlight beam shook visibly. "We need to get out of here, now." Jason didn't look skeptical anymore. We ran, full out sprinted through the maze of machinery toward the entrance. I kept expecting to feel hands grabbing at me from behind, but we made it to the loading dock doors without incident. We didn't slow down until we were through the fence and back at Jason's car. As we peeled out of there, I explained everything between gasping breaths, how I'd seen what I thought was one of them in the shadows, how I'd gone through that back door alone, how the man had stalked me. "I think he was living there," I said, as the factory disappeared behind us. "There was bedding and stuff on the floor." "Why would he come after you like that?" Andrew asked, his face still pale. I didn't have an answer then. I still don't. What haunts me most isn't just the man, himself. It's the realization that he must have been watching us the whole time. He waited until I was separated from my friends. He was patient, calculating, and whatever he wanted from me, I'm thankful I never found out. We reported it to the police later that day. They said they'd send someone to check it out, but when we followed up a week later, they claimed they found no evidence anyone was living there. No bedding, no signs of habitation. I've never gone back to verify. I never will. None of us ever tried urban exploration again. That single afternoon was enough to cure that curiosity forever. Sometimes I wonder if that man is still there, waiting in the darkness of that factory. If he's watching other curious explorers who venture in waiting for one to separate from their group. And sometimes, in my worst nightmares, I see those sunken eyes again, staring at me through the darkness, patient and hungry. Story 5. I still get goosebumps thinking about what happened last May. We're coming up on the 1-year anniversary, and I still haven't fully processed how close my family came to, well, not being here anymore. Like everyone else during the lockdown, we were going absolutely stir-crazy by May of 2020. We'd been stuck at home since mid-March, and the walls were starting to close in on us. My parents were working from home, I was doing online classes for my sophomore year of college, and my sister Ellie, she's 14, was doing virtual middle school. We were all getting on each other's nerves big time. We live in a suburb outside of Austin, Texas, in one of those cookie-cutter neighborhoods with decent-sized backyards. Nothing fancy, but we've got about a 1/4 acre of flat grass behind the house with a wooden privacy fence around it. My dad had bought this big 8-person tent a few years back for a camping trip that never happened, and it had been sitting in our garage, collecting dust ever since. So that Friday, Mom suggested we camp in the backyard as something different to do. Dad got super excited about it. He'd been looking for projects to keep himself busy. He spent all afternoon cleaning out the tent, checking for spiders and whatnot, and setting it up on the flattest part of the yard, which is right in the middle, maybe 30 feet from our back porch. He even dragged out our old camping air mattresses and sleeping bags. I remember Mom making hot dogs for dinner, and Dad was talking about making s'mores later in our fire pit. Ellie seemed quieter than usual, but I figured she was just being a moody teenager. We were all planning to sleep in the tent that night. Mom, Dad, Ellie, and me. Dad even brought the portable speaker out so we could listen to music. Everything changed around 7:30 that evening. We were getting ready to head out to the tent when Ellie said she wasn't feeling well. Mom immediately went into pandemic panic mode, asking if she had a fever, could she smell things, all that COVID checklist stuff. Ellie didn't have a fever, but she said her stomach hurt, and she just wanted to sleep in her own bed. Dad looked disappointed, but Mom shut the whole thing down immediately. If Ellie's not feeling well, we're not doing this tonight. We can try again tomorrow or next weekend. Dad tried to salvage it, suggesting maybe just he and I could still camp out. But Mom gave him the look, and that was that. I was honestly a little relieved. The mosquitoes were already starting to come out, and our backyard backs up to a busy street. Not a highway or anything, but a main road through our neighborhood where people drive too fast. The traffic noise probably would have kept me up anyway. So Dad deflated the air mattresses and left the tent up, figuring we might use it the next day if Ellie felt better. We all went to bed in our normal rooms around 10:30. I remember checking social media for a while and finally falling, asleep around 11:15 or so. I woke up to what sounded like an explosion. The whole house shook. There was this horrible screeching sound of metal twisting, then a massive boom that vibrated through the walls. It was 12:37 according to my phone when I shot up in bed. I could hear my parents' door fly open and my dad shouting, "What the hell was that?" I ran into the hallway at the same time as my parents. Ellie came out of her room looking terrified. We all rushed downstairs together, and I could see through our back door that something was seriously wrong. There were headlights shining into our yard at a weird angle. Dad told us to stay inside, but Mom and I followed him anyway as he went out onto the back porch. What we saw still gives me nightmares. A car, a beat-up silver Nissan, had completely destroyed our back fence and was sitting right in the middle of our yard, directly where our tent had been set up. The tent was shredded and partially wrapped around the front of the car, which was still running with its headlights on. The whole yard was littered with pieces of our fence, car parts, and dirt that had been thrown up from the impact. The driver's door opened, and this guy stumbled out. Even from the porch, I could tell something was off about him. He was skinny, maybe in his mid-20s, with stringy hair and wearing a dirty white t-shirt. He was having trouble standing up straight and kept looking around like he was confused about where he was. "Are you okay?" my dad called out, starting to step off the porch. That's when the guy spotted us. He mumbled something I couldn't understand and started walking, stumbling, toward our porch. His movements were jerky and unpredictable. I remember grabbing my mom's arm and pulling her back toward the door. "Call 911, Dad said over his shoulder, not taking his eyes off the guy. The man was maybe 15 feet from our porch when he called out, "Hey, need to use your phone." His words were all slurred together. He reached into his pocket, and I swear my heart stopped. Mom had already dialed 911 and was frantically telling them what happened. Just as the guy reached the bottom step of our porch, we heard sirens. Thank God our local police station is only about a mile from our house. 2 police cars screeched to a halt out front, and officers came running through our side gate with flashlights. The guy tried to turn around when he heard them, lost his balance, and fell face first onto our lawn. The cops had him in handcuffs within seconds. We gave our statements to the police. The guy was clearly drunk or high on something. He couldn't even tell them his own name at first. They took him away in a squad car while other officers documented the scene. One of them told us we were lucky no one was hurt and said they'd need to come back in the morning to finish the investigation. None of us slept the rest of the night. We just sat in the living room, still in shock. The car was left there until morning when a tow truck could come get it. I remember staring out the window at it, illuminated by our porch light, thinking about how that could have been us under there. When morning finally came, more police officers arrived, along with the tow truck. That's when one of the officers came to talk to us. He looked grim. "I need to tell you folks something," he said. When we searched the vehicle, we found a loaded 9mm handgun in the glove compartment. Given the suspect's level of intoxication and his behavior, I have to say, it's fortunate you weren't outside when this happened. My mom actually collapsed into a chair. The reality of what could have happened hit us all at once. If Ellie hadn't said she felt sick, we would have been sleeping in that tent. We would have been what my dad later grimly called little human burritos with nowhere to go when that car came crashing through our fence. The officer told us they estimated the car was going over 90 miles per hour when it lost control and crashed through our fence. 90. There wouldn't have been time to react. We would have been asleep one moment and gone the next, or worse, injured and at the mercy of a drunk, armed man before police arrived. Later that day, after the car had been towed away and the police had finished, we learned more about what happened. The driver was a 26-year-old guy who had been at a house party a few blocks away. His blood alcohol level was over 3 times the legal limit. He'd been arrested for DUI, reckless endangerment, possession of a weapon while intoxicated, and a bunch of other charges. The weirdest part of all of this? Ellie admitted the next day that she hadn't actually felt sick. She said she just had a really bad feeling about sleeping outside that night. She couldn't explain it, just that she felt like we shouldn't do it. My mom, who's never been superstitious, keeps saying it was our guardian angel looking out for us. My dad, who's usually the practical one, doesn't even argue with her about it. I don't know what to think. All I know is that some random impulse, some unexplainable feeling my sister had, saved all our lives that night. It's been almost a year now, We had to replace the fence, obviously. Dad planted new grass where the car tore up the yard. To most people who visit, you can't even tell anything happened, but none of us go into the backyard after dark anymore. And the tent? Dad cut it into pieces before throwing it away, like he couldn't stand the thought of ever using it again. Sometimes I lie awake at night thinking about parallel universes. Is there one where Ellie didn't speak up? Where we all went to sleep in that tent? Where that drunk driver still crashed through our fence at 12:37 a.m.? I try not to think about it too much. All I know is that I'm typing this now because of some inexplicable feeling my little sister had. Some people might call it coincidence, but when I think about that loaded gun and that erratic man stumbling toward our porch and the way that car completely obliterated exactly where we would have been sleeping, coincidence doesn't seem like a big enough word. I don't know why we were spared that night. I don't know why Ellie had that feeling. I just know that May 15th, 2020 should have been the last day of our lives, but somehow it wasn't. And I don't think any of us will ever forget how close we came. Story 6. I've been debating whether to share this for months, but I need to get it out there as a warning to other delivery drivers, especially women working late shifts. What happened to me 4 months ago still gives me nightmares, and I'm still in therapy trying to process it all. I've been delivering pizzas for Tony's on the east side of Saraville for about 2 years now. It's not glamorous work, but the tips are decent and the flexible schedule helps me pay for college. I usually try to avoid closing shifts, but my co-worker Jake had a family emergency that night, and I needed the extra hours. So there I was, working until midnight on a Tuesday in late October. The night had been pretty slow, just a few deliveries to the usual addresses near campus. Around 11 o'clock, I was wiping down counters and hoping we wouldn't get any more orders when the system pinged. Last delivery of the night. The address wasn't one I recognized, somewhere on the outskirts of town in the wooded area, past the old mill. The order itself was simple: 2 large pepperoni pizzas, breadsticks, and a 2-liter of Coke. Nothing unusual. The customer had paid with a gift card online and added a 15% tip. Not amazing, but not terrible either. The delivery instructions said, "Garlic loose cabins, cabin 3. Follow road to the end." I asked my manager Tony if he knew the place. He shrugged and said he thought they were those rental cabins for hunters and weekend tourists, about 15 minutes outside town. I'd heard of them, but never delivered there before. Most of our deliveries stayed within the 5-mile radius around campus. While the pizzas cooked, I looked up the address on my phone. It was definitely in a remote area, but Google Maps showed it as a legitimate location. The reviews for Garlic Loose Cabins were sparse, but seemed normal enough. A few complaints about spotty Wi-Fi and outdated bathrooms, but nothing alarming. By 11:30, I was loaded up and driving out of town. The main roads were well lit, but as I turned onto Millbrook Road, streetlights became scarcer. My headlights cut through the darkness as trees crowded in on both sides. The road narrowed and began to wind, and I slowed down to avoid the occasional pothole. I passed the "Leaving Saraville" sign, and an uneasy feeling started creeping up my spine. I chalked it up to being tired and the unfamiliarity of the area. I'd delivered to plenty of remote houses before. It was part of the job. After about 12 minutes of driving, I spotted a weathered wooden sign for Garlic Loose Cabins and turned onto a gravel road. My car bounced and shuddered as I crawled along at maybe 10 miles per hour. The trees were dense here, their branches creating a tunnel effect that my headlights barely penetrated. The cabins were spread out along the winding path. I passed cabin 1, which was completely dark, and then cabin 2, which also showed no signs of life. There were no other cars parked outside either cabin, which struck me as odd. If people were staying here, where were their vehicles? When I reached cabin 3, I parked in the small clearing in front. Unlike the main road, there were a few path lights here, dim yellow bulbs on short posts that created small pools of light every 20 feet or so. They did little to illuminate the actual cabin, which was completely dark. No porch light, no interior lights, nothing. I sat in my car for a moment, pizza warming bags on my passenger seat, feeling increasingly uncomfortable. Why order pizza to a dark cabin? Maybe they were conserving electricity or had just stepped out briefly. Maybe they were in the bathroom or sleeping and would wake up when I knocked. I tried to rationalize, but something felt off. I texted the number from the order. "Hi, this is Carolina from Tony's Pizza. I'm outside cabin 3 with your order." No response. I waited another minute, then decided to just deliver the pizzas and get out of there. I grabbed the warming bags, switched on my phone flashlight, and stepped out of the car. The night was unusually quiet. No cricket sounds, no distant traffic, just the soft crunch of gravel under my feet and the rustle of leaves in the slight breeze. The path to the cabin door was about 30 yards long. As I walked, I noticed the cabin had a small porch with a couple of chairs, but no lights whatsoever. The windows were all dark, some with curtains drawn. There was absolutely no indication anyone was inside. When I reached the porch, I took a deep breath and knocked firmly on the door. "Tony's Pizza Delivery," I called out, trying to sound cheerful despite my growing anxiety. Silence. I knocked again, louder this time. "Hello? Pizza Delivery." Still nothing. I set the pizzas down and pulled out my phone to call the customer. The number rang 4 times before going to a generic voicemail. "The person you are trying to reach is unavailable." I hung up without leaving a message and tried texting again. "I'm at the door with your pizza. Are you home?" As I stood there in the dim light, I noticed details that made me even more uneasy. There was no car anywhere near the cabin. No lights had flipped on when I knocked. The place felt completely abandoned. Just as I was about to give up and leave, my phone dinged with a text message from the customer. "Sorry, in shower. Door unlocked. Leave pizza on table inside. Thanks." I stared at that message for what felt like an eternity. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to leave, to get back in my car and drive away. But I also didn't want to lose my job. Tony had strict policies about completing deliveries, and I needed this job. Against my better judgment, I tried the door handle. It turned easily. The door swung open with a long, low creak that sent chills down my spine. "Hello?" I called out again, standing in the doorway. "Pizza Delivery." The interior was pitch black. I shined my phone flashlight inside, revealing a small living area with a wooden table, a couch, and a kitchenette. There was a closed door that presumably led to a bedroom or bathroom. Still using my better judgment, I decided I'd just put the pizzas on the table and leave immediately. I stepped inside, the floorboards groaning under my weight. The air smelled musty, like the cabin hadn't been properly aired out in weeks. I hurried to the table, set down the pizzas, and turned to leave. That's when I heard it, a distinct creak from the direction of the closed door. I froze, my heart suddenly pounding in my chest. "Hello?" I said, my voice barely above a whisper. The door slowly opened, and a tall figure emerged from the darkness. I could only make out a silhouette, a man, bigger than me, moving deliberately in my direction. "Got the pizza," I stammered. backing toward the front door. "Receipts on top. Have a good night." He didn't respond, just kept coming toward me. I couldn't see his face clearly in the darkness, but something about his movement terrified me. It wasn't casual or normal, it was purposeful, predatory. I turned to bolt for the door and crashed straight into another person, a second man who had silently appeared in the doorway behind me. I bounced off his chest and stumbled backward, nearly falling. "Whoa there," he said, his voice unsettlingly calm. "No need to rush off." In that moment, pure instinct took over. I didn't think, I just reacted. I feinted to the right, then ducked left and shoved past him with every ounce of strength I had. He tried to grab my arm, but only caught my jacket. I heard the fabric tear as I broke free and sprinted down the porch steps. Behind me, I heard one of them curse and then footsteps. They were both coming after me. The path seemed twice as long as before, the dim lights barely helping as I ran full speed toward my car. The pizza warming bags lay forgotten on the cabin floor. I fumbled with my keys as I ran, nearly dropping them in my panic. I could hear them behind me, gaining ground with their longer strides. My lungs burned and my legs felt like rubber, but fear pushed me forward. I reached my car, yanked the door open, and threw myself inside. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely get the key in the ignition. In my rearview mirror, I saw the two men emerging from the shadows, moving quickly toward me. The engine roared to life. I slammed the car into reverse, tires spitting gravel as I backed up, then shifted to drive and floored it. The car fishtailed on the loose gravel before gaining traction, and then I was speeding down the narrow road, branches scraping against the windows. I didn't slow down until I reached the main road, and even then, I drove well over the speed limit until I saw the "Welcome to Saraville" sign. Only then did I pull over, hands still trembling on the steering wheel, and call 911. The police took my statement but seemed skeptical at first. They kept asking if I was sure I hadn't misinterpreted the situation, if maybe the customers were just socially awkward or drunk. But something in my face or voice must have convinced them, because they eventually sent 2 officers out to investigate. What they found chilled me to the bone. The cabin hadn't been rented to anyone. The property manager hadn't issued any keys that week. The phone number used to place the order couldn't be traced. It was a burner. The gift card used to pay had been purchased with cash at a convenience store 20 miles away. But the worst part? When the officers entered the cabin, they found rope, duct tape, and a hunting knife on the bed in the room where the first man had emerged from. My pizza warming bags were still on the floor where I dropped them, but the pizzas were gone. It was a trap. The whole thing, the remote location, the dark cabin, the text telling me to come inside, it was all a setup. One man waiting inside, another waiting to block my escape. I haven't delivered pizzas since that night. I can't bring myself to drive to unfamiliar addresses, especially after dark. I've started working the register at a campus bookstore instead. Lower pay, but at least I'm safe. The police never caught them. They found some partial fingerprints, but nothing in the system. The cabin had been wiped down, except for a few spots they missed. The security cameras at the entrance to the property had been disabled days earlier. Sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night, heart racing, convinced I can hear footsteps outside my apartment. I've installed extra locks, a security system, and I keep pepper spray by my bed. I can't help but think about what would have happened if I hadn't gotten away. If I'd hesitated just a second longer, or if I hadn't been able to push past that man in the doorway. I don't think anyone would have found me for days. My car would eventually have been discovered, but by then, I'm sharing this because I want other delivery drivers to be careful. Trust your instincts. If a situation feels wrong, it probably is. Don't enter houses or apartments alone, especially in remote areas. And remember that your life is worth more than your job. I still don't know who those men were or if they've tried this with someone else. That's what keeps me up at night, the thought that they're still out there, maybe planning the same trap for another unsuspecting delivery person, someone who might not be as lucky as I was. Story 7. I still get cold sweats thinking about that night. It's been 3 months and I can't shake it. I've barely slept, and when I do, I'm right back there in those tunnels. I need to get this off my chest, even if nobody believes me. So St. Alora's Church sits about 20 minutes outside our town, deep in these woods that nobody ever goes to anymore. It's this old, crumbling stone building from like the 1800s or something. Everyone knows about it, but nobody really goes there. There are all these stories about how it burned down once, got rebuilt, then just got abandoned and left to rot. My buddy Mike brought it up during our Friday night beers. "We should check out St. Alora's," he said, like it was no big deal. Mike's always suggesting weird shit when he's had a few. Usually we laugh it off, but this time Trey and Connor were immediately into it. I was the only one hesitating. "Come on, James, don't be such a pussy," Connor said, already pulling up Google Maps on his phone. "Look, it's not even that far." I'm not usually the cautious one in our group, but something about that place always gave me the creeps. My grandpa used to tell me to stay away from there when I was a kid. Said people disappeared around there. But after 3 beers and all of them calling me chicken, I caved. We decided to go the next night, Saturday. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the church, so I started researching it online. Most of what I found was just the usual local history stuff, but then I stumbled across this old forum post about something called the Blue Drum Boy. According to the post, during some skirmish in the 1800s, a child drummer boy was killed, and his body was never recovered. Supposedly, he still marches through tunnels beneath the church, beating his drum. I thought it was just stupid local folklore, but the mention of tunnels caught my attention. I'd never heard about tunnels under St. Alora's before. Saturday night came, and we all piled into Mike's Jeep around midnight. The drive out there felt longer than I remembered from when my parents would drive past it when I was a kid. The road got narrower and bumpier the further we went, until Mike had to slow to a crawl to avoid the potholes. The headlights sliced through the darkness, catching the reflection of animals' eyes in the trees. "This is it," Mike said, pulling onto a dirt path that was barely visible. We parked about 100 yards from the church and walked the rest of the way with our flashlights. St. Alora's looked exactly like you'd expect. Crumbling stone walls, broken stained glass windows, vines crawling up the sides. The moon was nearly full, casting everything in this eerie blue-white light. "Holy shit, this place is creepy as fuck," Trey whispered, even though there was nobody around to hear us. We walked around to the back, past these old grave markers. Most was so worn you couldn't read the names anymore. That's when we saw it, this wooden panel on the ground. It looked like it covered some kind of door, but it had been smashed in recently. The wood splinters were still fresh, not weathered. "Someone's been here," I said, feeling my stomach tighten. "Perfect timing," Connor grinned, already pulling out the small crowbar he'd brought. "Saves us the trouble." I told them about the Blue Drum Boy and the tunnels, half expecting them to laugh, but they just got more excited. "Dude, underground tunnels? That's exactly what we came for." Mike slapped my shoulder. I checked my phone. It was 1:30 in the morning. We all switched on our headlamps and looked down into the hole. Stone steps spiraled down into darkness. The air coming up smelled stale and damp, like wet cement and rotting leaves. "I'll go first," Connor said, already lowering himself onto the steps. One by one, we descended. The steps were narrow and slippery with moss. I counted 27 steps before we reached the bottom. The passage turned sharply to the left, and none of our lights could see around the corner. "I brought flares," Trey said, pulling one from his backpack. He struck it, the bright red light hissing to life, and tossed it around the corner. The flare rolled and came to rest in what looked like some kind of cellar. We followed it, and that's when I started to feel really uneasy. The cellar had these rusted metal tables pushed against the walls. There were stained blankets piled in corners and broken glass all over the floor. But what made my blood run cold were the fresh blood smears on the floor. Not old, dried blood. Fresh, still slightly wet blood that glistened in our lights. "What the fuck?" I whispered, grabbing Mike's arm. "We need to go, now." "Relax, man," Connor said, already walking toward a darkened hallway where the blood trail led. "Probably just some animal that got in here and hurt itself." I didn't believe that for a second, but I followed them anyway. The hallway was narrow, forcing us to walk single file. Water dripped somewhere in the distance, each drop echoing. The walls were carved right out of the earth and stone, reinforced with old wooden beams that looked ready to collapse. The hallway opened into a smaller tunnel with a ceiling so low we had to hunch over. At the end was a heavy iron grate covering what looked like a rusted ladder going even deeper. Someone had cut through the chain that once secured the grate. "Whoever was here really wanted to get down there," Trey muttered. "Let's find out why," Connor said, pulling the grate open with a screech that made me flinch. The ladder was severely corroded, covered in red-brown rust. Connor went first, then Trey, then Mike. I was last, my hands shaking as I gripped the cold metal rungs. We'd descended maybe 15 feet when I heard a crack, followed by Connor's scream. The ladder had broken apart, sending Connor crashing to the ground below. We rushed down as carefully as we could. Connor was writhing on the stone floor, hands clutching his legs. "My ankles," he gasped between clenched teeth. "I think they're broken. Both of them." Mike and I checked. They were definitely broken. His right ankle was twisted at an unnatural angle, and both were already swelling. He couldn't put any weight on them. "We need to get him out of here," I said. "How?" Trey asked, looking up at the broken ladder. "We can't climb back up that way." He was right. The ladder was completely separated about halfway up. There was no way we could carry Connor back the way we came. "There has to be another way out," Mike said, trying to sound confident. "These tunnels have to lead somewhere." We had no choice. Mike and I supported Connor between us, his arms around our shoulders, while Trey led the way with the strongest flashlight. The tunnel continued for what felt like forever, gradually widening enough that we could walk more comfortably, even with Connor between us. The walls were the worst part. As we got deeper, I noticed scratch marks, hundreds of them, like someone had clawed at the stone with their fingernails. Some of the grooves still had what looked like dried blood and skin fragments in them. "Don't look at the walls," I told the others, but of course that just made them look. "Jesus Christ," Trey whispered. We passed a small alcove filled with children's shoes, old-fashioned ones, like from 100 years ago or more. They were arranged in neat pairs, covered in dust but otherwise undisturbed. I felt like I was going to throw up. Connor was in bad shape, sweating and pale despite the cold. We had to keep stopping to let him rest, but each time we did, I swore I could hear something moving in the darkness behind us. A soft shuffling like feet dragging across stone. After what must have been at least an hour, we found another ladder leading up to what looked like a hatch in the ceiling. "I'll check it out," I said, handing my portion of Connor's weight to Trey. This ladder was in better shape than the first one. I climbed quickly, pushed against the hatch, and it swung open with a groan. I pulled myself up and found myself in what looked like an old storeroom. Moldy crates and broken furniture were stacked against the walls. The air was stale, but not as damp as in the tunnels. That's when I saw him. In the corner, slumped against the wall, was a man. At first I thought he was sleeping, but as I moved my light across him, I could see his skin had this grayish-green tinge. His eyes were open, staring at nothing, and there was a needle still stuck in his arm. He'd been dead for days, maybe a week. I almost screamed, but I managed to choke it back. I couldn't let the others know yet. We needed to get Connor out first. "It's clear," I called down, my voice cracking. "I think we can get out through here." It took all three of us to get Connor up through the hatch. His face was gray with pain, and he'd stopped talking, just making these little gasping sounds whenever we moved him. Once we were all up, I positioned myself so my body blocked their view of the dead man. "There's a door over there," I said, pointing to the opposite wall. We shuffled across the room, and thankfully nobody noticed the corpse in the dim light. The door was old and warped, but it opened when Mike and I pushed against it. We emerged into what looked like a service area behind the main church building. The fresh air hit us like a wave, and I gulped it down. We carried Connor back to the Jeep and drove straight to the hospital. We made up some story about him falling through the floor of an abandoned barn we were exploring. The doctors didn't question it much. They were too busy taking him into surgery. I never told the others about the dead man in the storeroom. I couldn't bring myself to. We never reported it either. How could we explain being there without getting in trouble for trespassing? I checked the local news every day, waiting to see if someone found him, but there's been nothing. The worst part is, I can't stop thinking about his eyes. They weren't just the empty stare of a dead person. They were fixed on a point in the corner of the room, like he'd seen something in his final moments, something that terrified him. I don't believe in ghost stories anymore. What haunts me isn't the blue drum boy or any other supernatural bullshit. It's the reality of what we found. A man who died alone in a forgotten place beneath a forgotten church. A man who was waiting for something that never came, or running from something that finally caught him. I'll never know which, and that's what keeps me up at night. Story 8. I still can't believe what happened to me at Sandpiper Beach last summer. It's been almost a year, but I get goosebumps every time I think about it. I haven't told many people because honestly, it sounds so crazy that I'm afraid no one will believe me. But I need to get this off my chest. I'm 22, and I was on this weekend trip with my college buddies, Jake, Matt, and Chris. We'd been planning it for months, just a chill getaway before our senior year started. Sandpiper Beach isn't super fancy or anything, just this laid-back coastal town with a decent boardwalk and some bars. The kind of place where you can rent a cheap beach house for the weekend and have a good time without breaking the bank. Sunday was our last night there. We'd spent the day swimming and playing volleyball, then started a bonfire on the beach as the sun went down. We were drinking beers, roasting marshmallows, that kind of thing. I wasn't wasted or anything, just pleasantly buzzed. Around midnight, the guys wanted to head to this bar they'd heard about, but I wasn't feeling it. The beer had made me kind of sleepy, and I told them I'd walk back to our rental on my own. "You sure, Ethan?" Jake had asked, and I nodded. I remember thinking how nice it would be to have some alone time, just walking along the boardwalk at night with the sound of the waves. So they went off to the bar, and I started walking. It was a beautiful night, warm with a light breeze, stars everywhere, and the moon reflecting off the water. The boardwalk was mostly empty except for a few couples here and there. Most of the shops were closed, their neon signs turned off. I felt so peaceful, like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. That feeling didn't last long. About halfway back to our rental, I realized I really needed to pee. All those beers, you know. There was this public restroom just off the boardwalk. Even from a distance, I could tell it was old and run down. One of those concrete block buildings that have probably been there since the 70s. The lights outside were flickering, casting weird shadows. I hesitated, but my bladder was screaming at me, and I figured it would just take a minute. As soon as I pushed open the heavy metal door, I regretted it. The smell hit me first. That typical public bathroom stench, but worse, like something had died in there. The fluorescent lights buzzed and flickered, leaving parts of the bathroom in complete darkness. There were 4 stalls along one wall and a row of sinks opposite them. Everything was grimy and covered in graffiti. I remember thinking, just get in and get out, Ethan. I headed for the stall furthest from the door, mainly because it was under one of the working lights. I locked the door, did my business, and was just about to flush when I heard the main door creak open. Footsteps, slow and deliberate, not like someone rushing in to use the bathroom. I froze. I don't know why, but something about those footsteps instantly made me uneasy. I could see through the crack in the stall door that someone was walking around the bathroom, not heading to a urinal or a stall, just circling. I couldn't see much of them, just glimpses of dark clothing as they passed by the crack in the door. Then the footsteps stopped near the sinks directly across from my stall. I couldn't see or hear anything. Were they just standing there, waiting? My heart was pounding so hard I was sure they could hear it. I decided to finish up and get the hell out of there. I flushed the toilet, trying to act normal, and reached for the stall door. It wouldn't budge. I pushed harder, thinking it was just stuck. Nothing. I put my shoulder into it and felt resistance, like something or someone was holding it shut from the outside. "Hello," I called out, my voice echoing against the tile walls. "I'm in here. Can you let me out?" No response. Panic started rising in my chest. I threw my full weight against the door, again and again. On the 3rd try, it suddenly gave way, and I stumbled forward, nearly falling. The bathroom appeared empty. I caught a glimpse of the main door swinging shut, like whoever had been there had just left. I rushed to it, grabbing the handle and turning. It wouldn't move. Somehow, it had been locked from the outside. "Hey!" I shouted, banging on the door. "Open the door! This isn't funny!" That's when I heard it, a slight shuffling sound coming from one of the stalls behind me, the one next to mine. Someone had been in here the whole time. There had been 2 people. I spun around, my back pressed against the main door. All the stall doors were closed, but now I could see a pair of shoes visible in the gap beneath one of the stall doors. Someone was standing on a toilet, hiding. I've never felt fear like that in my life. Pure ice-cold terror flooding my veins. I was trapped in a bathroom with someone who had deliberately locked me in and another person who had been hiding the whole time. My eyes darted around, looking for any escape. That's when I noticed a small window near the ceiling, above the sinks. It wasn't much bigger than a pizza box, but I was skinny enough that I might be able to squeeze through. I climbed onto one of the sinks, praying it wouldn't tear from the wall under my weight. It creaked ominously as I stood up, reaching for the window. It was stuck, probably hadn't been opened in years. I pushed with all my strength, and finally, it moved, scraping loudly as it opened. Behind me, I heard a stall door slam open. I didn't look back. I grabbed the window ledge and pulled myself up, squeezing my shoulders through the narrow opening. My shirt rode up, the rough concrete scraping against my stomach as I wriggled through. Something grabbed my ankle. I kicked wildly, connecting with something solid. There was a grunt of pain, and the grip loosened just enough for me to pull my leg free. I tumbled out of the window, landing hard on the ground outside. Pain shot through my knee, but adrenaline took over. But before I scrambled to my feet, I caught a glimpse of the face in the window. A man, middle-aged, with unnaturally pale skin that seemed to glow under the fluorescent lights. His face was hairy, almost like a beard, but not quite, more patchy and wild. But the most disturbing thing was his clothes. He was wearing a bright graphic tee, the kind teenagers wear, and it looked so wrong on him, like he was playing dress-up. Our eyes met for just a second. His were hollow, empty, no emotion at all, just hunger. I ran. My knee was throbbing. I'd discover later I'd torn my meniscus in the fall, but I didn't care. I ran back toward the boardwalk, toward people, toward safety. I didn't stop until I reached a group of late-night fishermen on the pier. When the police came, I was still shaking. I led them back to the bathroom, but it was empty. The window was still open, just like I'd left it. The main door was unlocked. They found scratch marks on the outside handle, like someone had used a tool to jam it, but no fingerprints, no evidence of who had been there. One of the officers, an older guy with kind eyes, put his hand on my shoulder. "You did the right thing, kid. You trusted your instincts. Some people wouldn't have been so lucky." Those words have haunted me ever since. What would have happened if I hadn't gotten out? What were they planning to do to me? The police searched the area but found nothing. No suspicious characters matching my description. Without cameras in that section of the boardwalk, there was no way to identify them. We left Sandpiper Beach the next morning. I made up some excuse about my knee hurting too much to stay. I couldn't tell my friends what really happened. It sounded too crazy, too much like a horror movie. They'd think I was exaggerating or that I'd been drunker than I actually was. I've looked up news reports from Sandpiper Beach every few weeks since then, dreading the day I'll see a headline about a tourist found dead or missing. So far, nothing. But I can't help wondering if those men are still there, hanging around that bathroom, waiting for someone else to walk in alone. Sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night, feeling that hand on my ankle, seeing that empty stare. I've gone over it 1,000 times in my head, trying to make sense of it all. Were they planning to rob me, hurt me, something worse? And why did that man look so wrong? Like he was wearing a costume that didn't quite fit. I still don't have answers. I still jump at unexpected noises and avoid public bathrooms unless I absolutely have to use them. And I definitely haven't been back to Sandpiper Beach. I don't know if I'll ever understand what happened that night or who those men were. All I know is that I got lucky. I escaped. And I can't shake the feeling that somewhere out there, they're still waiting, watching, looking for someone who isn't as fortunate as I was. Story 9. I still can't believe it's been almost 2 years since that day at the old church in Pine Haven. I've tried to make sense of what happened, but I can't. I've written this out so many times, deleted it, rewritten it. But I think I need to just get it off my chest finally. For context, Pine Haven is this super small town where literally nothing happens. I mean nothing. We had one grocery store, a gas station, and a McDonald's that closed at 9 p.m. That's how boring this place was. My buddy Colton and I had just finished our junior year of high school, and summer was already dragging by the second day. It was a Friday, and we'd spent most of the day at my house playing Xbox, Call of Duty, Fortnite, the usual stuff. But by late afternoon, we were completely over it. My parents were gone for the weekend visiting my aunt in Riverdale, so I had the house to myself. We ordered pizza, demolished it, and then just sat there on the couch staring at our phones like zombies. "Dude, I can't do this all summer," Colton said, tossing his controller aside. "We need to do something." That's when I remembered the old church, the abandoned one at the end of Mill Creek Road. Everyone in town knew about it, but nobody ever went there anymore. When I was a kid, my mom used to tell me to stay away from it. I think she just didn't want me playing in an old building that might collapse, but other kids always said it was haunted. Typical small town stuff. "Let's go check out that old church," I suggested. "The one past the creek." Colton immediately perked up. "Holy shit, I forgot about that place. My brother tried to go there once with his friends, but they chickened out before they even got inside." I'll admit, I was kind of scared of that place when I was younger. But now? We were 17, almost 18. What was there to be afraid of? An old building with some cobwebs and maybe a raccoon or two. The idea of doing something, anything, different was enough to get us off the couch. We took my car, this beat-up Honda Civic my dad gave me when I got my license. It was around 6 in the evening, still plenty of daylight left. The drive to Mill Creek Road only took about 15 minutes, but the last stretch was rough. The pavement gave way to gravel, then to what was barely even a road anymore. "Dude, slow down. You're gonna wreck your car," Colton said as we bumped along what had become more of a trail than a road. I had to stop about a quarter mile from where I thought the church was because there was no way my car was making it any further. The road was completely overgrown, with vines and weeds pushing up through cracks in what remained of the pavement. It was like nature was trying to erase any evidence that humans had ever been here. We got out and continued on foot. The humidity was intense, and within minutes my t-shirt was sticking to my back. The whole place felt weirdly quiet. No birds, no insects, nothing but the sound of our shoes crunching on gravel and dead leaves. "You sure you know where we're going?" Colton asked after about 10 minutes of walking. "Yeah, it should be right up ahead," I said, though honestly I was starting to doubt myself. Everything looked different than I remembered from driving by as a kid. Then we rounded a bend, and there it was. And holy shit, it was so much creepier than I remembered. The church looked like it was being swallowed by the forest. Vines crawled up its stone walls, and trees had grown so close to the building that their branches scraped against the broken stained glass windows. It was bigger than I remembered too, a massive stone structure with a bell tower that tilted slightly to one side. There was a rusty iron fence surrounding the property, but it was almost completely hidden by tall grass and bushes. "Whoa," Colton whispered beside me. "This is sick." We approached the fence, looking for a way in. It didn't take long to find a section that had fallen apart. We carefully stepped through, making our way toward the entrance. The double doors at the front were huge, easily 12 feet tall, made of dark wood with iron handles that had turned green with age. Reached out and pushed one of the doors. It gave a loud, echoing crack that made both of us jump. The sound seemed to go on forever, reverberating throughout the building. The door swung open, revealing the inside of the church. What struck me immediately was how clean it was. I mean, not actually clean. There was dust everywhere and cobwebs hung from the ceiling, but there was none of the usual stuff you'd expect in an abandoned building. No graffiti on the walls, No beer cans or cigarette butts on the floor. No signs that teenagers had ever used this place as a hangout. The rows of wooden pews stretched out before us, leading to an altar at the far end where sunlight filtered through a broken stained glass window, casting colored patterns across the stone floor. The silence inside was so complete that I could hear my own heartbeat. "Dude, check out how our footprints are the only ones in the dust," Colton whispered, pointing at the floor. He was right. The layer of dust on the floor was undisturbed, except for where we had just walked. "Maybe no one's been here in years," I suggested, my voice sounding way too loud in the stillness. We walked slowly down the center aisle, our footsteps echoing off the high ceiling. The wood of the pews looked almost untouched by time, which seemed impossible for a place that had been abandoned for decades. As we got closer to the altar, I noticed a large wooden podium positioned at the front. That's when it happened. Just as we reached the end of the aisle, there was a sound, a deep, resonating boom that shook the entire building. It was so powerful I felt it in my chest. We both froze. "What the fuck was that?" Colton hissed, grabbing my arm. "I don't know," I whispered back. "Maybe something fell." We stood completely still for what felt like forever, listening. Nothing but silence followed. I pulled out my phone and turned on the flashlight, sweeping it around the church. Colton did the same. Our beams of light cut through the dusty air, but there was nothing to see, just empty pews and silent walls. "There," Colton said suddenly, pointing his light toward the entrance. "I think there's another room over there to the side of the door. Maybe something fell in there?" I squinted in the direction he was pointing. There did seem to be a doorway I hadn't noticed before, partially hidden by shadows. "I'm going to check out this podium first," I said, moving toward the front of the church. I'm not sure why, but I felt drawn to it. The podium was massive, made of dark wood with intricate carvings along the sides. A large, dusty Bible still sat open on top. I ran my fingers over the pages, surprised by how intact they were. When I looked back, Colton was already halfway to the side room. "Come on," he called in a stage whisper. "Let's check it out." I joined him, and we cautiously approached the door he'd spotted. It was smaller than the main entrance and slightly ajar. Colton pushed it open slowly, and we peeked inside. It looked like some kind of storage room. There were folding chairs stacked against one wall, cardboard boxes scattered around, and what looked like old hymnals piled on a shelf. Our flashlights created strange, shifting shadows as we moved them around the room. That's when we heard it. Footsteps, coming from the main part of the church. Slow, deliberate footsteps, walking from the area of the podium toward the entrance. My blood went cold. Colton and I looked at each other, both wide-eyed with fear. Without a word, we switched off our flashlights and crouched down behind some boxes. My heart was pounding so hard I was sure whoever was out there could hear it. Through the partially open door, I could see a figure crossing the main church. It was too dark to make out details, but it was definitely a person, or at least something person-shaped, moving with slow, purposeful steps toward the entrance. What terrified me most was how silently they moved. The footsteps we heard didn't match up with their movements, almost like the sound was separate from the figure itself. The figure reached the main doors and pushed one open. The same loud creak we'd heard earlier filled the church, and then the door closed with a heavy thud. Colton and I stayed frozen in our hiding spot for what must have been 5 minutes, though it felt like hours. Neither of us dared to speak or move. Finally, I gathered the courage to peek out the door into the main church. Empty. "We need to go, now," I whispered. We didn't need any more discussion. We bolted from our hiding place, ran down the aisle, and burst through the front doors. We didn't stop running until we reached my car, tumbling inside and locking the doors. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely get the key in the ignition. As I started the car and turned it around, Colton finally spoke. "Eric," he said, his voice trembling, "whoever that was, they had to have been hiding near you when you were at the podium. There's nowhere else they could have come from." That's when the full horror of the situation hit me. The podium area was completely open. There were no doors, no curtains, nowhere anyone could have been hiding. I had been standing right there just moments before, and there was absolutely no one else in the church, or at least no one I could see. We never went back to that church. We never told anyone what happened either, not even our other friends. Who would believe us? We didn't even talk about it between ourselves after that day. But here's the thing that still keeps me up at night, 2 years later. I checked the town records online a few months after it happened. That church had been closed in 1978 after a fire that killed the pastor. According to the article I found, he was known for giving unusually long sermons, sometimes keeping his congregation there for hours. Some people said he was obsessed with the idea of sin and punishment. The fire started during one of his sermons, but the congregation managed to escape. Except for him. They found his body near the podium, the exact spot where I had been standing. Story 10. I still have trouble sleeping at night, even though it's been 3 years since the incident at Chongqing High School. I've talked to counselors, tried meditation, even considered hypnosis. Nothing helps. What I experienced during that NPCC camp keeps replaying in my mind like a broken record, especially when I'm alone in the dark. I was 16 then, in my 3rd year at Chongqing High in Singapore. Our school was pretty well known, not just for academics, but for its beautiful campus. The centerpiece was this man-made lake right in the middle of the school grounds. During the day, it was picture perfect. Crystal clear water with fountains shooting up, koi fish swimming lazily around, and benches where students would hang out during lunch. The administration was super proud of it, always showing it off to visitors and using it in all the promotional materials. But none of us knew what was beneath the surface. None of us knew the history. It happened during our annual NPCC, National Police Cadet Corps, camp in July. We'd been drilling all day in the hot sun, practicing formations and emergency protocols. By evening, we were exhausted, but still had to complete our night navigation exercise. My team consisted of me, Wei, my best friend Darren, and 3 other classmates. We were given coordinates and had to navigate our way around the campus, collecting stamps at each checkpoint. Around 10:30, we reached the checkpoint near the lake. The school was eerily quiet at that hour. All the teachers had gone home except for our NPCC commander, who was coordinating from the HQ point in the canteen. The main buildings were dark and only the emergency lights illuminated parts of the walkways. What struck me first was how different the lake looked at night. The fountains were turned off, and without the constant rippling, the water was completely still, like dark glass reflecting the few campus lights still on. I'd never seen it like this before. Usually, we were all gone by 6, and the lake area was cordoned off after school hours. While my teammates were figuring out the next coordinates, I walked to the lake's edge, curious about how clear the water might be without all the movement. I switched on my flashlight and pointed it down into the water. That's when I saw it. At first, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. The beam of light penetrated the dark water, and instead of seeing the concrete bottom I expected, there was a hole. Not just any hole, a massive, perfectly circular opening like the entrance to a tunnel. It was easily 3 meters in diameter and appeared to lead straight down into darkness. The edges were too precise to be natural. This was man-made. "Guys," I called out, my voice shaking slightly. "Come look at this." Darren came over first. "What's up?" "Look down there." I pointed my flashlight again. "Do you see that hole?" He squinted, then his eyes widened. "What the hell? I've never noticed that before." "That's because the fountains are always on during the day," I said. "The water's never this still." The others joined us, and we all stood there. 5 beams of light pointing into the water, illuminating this bizarre discovery. That's when I heard it, a sound so faint I wasn't sure if it was real. A low, pained groan, followed by what sounded like distant laughter. It seemed to be coming from the hole. "Did you hear that?" I asked, feeling goosebumps spread across my arms despite the humid night air. They all looked at me blankly. "Hear what?" Darren asked. I was about to answer when it came again, the same groan, longer this time, followed by that eerie laughter that made my skin crawl. That sound, like someone moaning or something. They exchanged glances. One of the girls, May, looked uncomfortable. "I don't hear anything, Way," Darren said carefully. "Maybe it's just the wind?" But there was no wind that night. The air was completely still, just like the water. I pointed my light back at the hole, and for a split second, I swear this happened. I saw something move at the edge of the darkness down there, like a pale hand reaching up toward the surface. I jumped back, nearly falling over. "Whoa, you okay?" Darren grabbed my arm to steady me. I couldn't even explain what I'd seen. "Nothing. Let's just go to the next checkpoint." As we walked away, I glanced back once more. The lake was still again, innocent looking under the night sky. But I knew what I'd seen and heard. The next morning, while everyone was at breakfast, I pulled Darren aside. "About last night, at the lake." He gave me a weird look. "You really freaked out, man. What was that about?" "I heard something coming from that hole, and I think I saw something too." Darren frowned. "Look, I saw the hole too. That was strange, but I didn't hear anything." "I want to ask Uncle Lee about it," I said. Uncle Lee wasn't really anyone's uncle. He was the school's oldest attendant, had been working there for almost 40 years. If anyone knew the secrets of Chongqing High, it would be him. We found him sweeping leaves near the canteen. He was in his 70s, thin but wiry, with a perpetual smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes. Students loved him because he was always ready with a joke or a story from the old days. "Uncle Lee," I approached him respectfully. "Can we ask you something?" "Ah, Wei and Darren." He leaned on his broom. "What can old Uncle Lee do for you boys today?" "It's about the lake," I said. "Last night during our camp we saw something strange." His smile didn't waver, but something in his eyes changed, a wariness that hadn't been there before. "We saw a big hole at the bottom of the lake," Darren jumped in, "when the water was still." "Do you know what it is?" Uncle Lee was quiet for a moment, looking from me to Darren and back again. Then he sighed. "You boys should be careful what you go looking for," he said softly. "Some things are better left alone." "So you do know about it?" I pressed. He nodded slowly. "That hole, it's the entrance to a tunnel. Goes right under the school grounds." "A tunnel? To where?" Darren asked. Uncle Lee looked around as if checking who might be listening, then gestured for us to come closer. "During the Japanese occupation in World War II, before this was a school, this whole area was used by the Japanese army. he explained in a near whisper. The main building, where your auditorium is now, that was their headquarters. And the basement. He trailed off, and I felt a chill despite the morning heat. The basement was where they took people for questioning, he continued. The tunnel connected the lake to the basement. They would bring prisoners through there, away from public eyes. I felt sick. You mean it was a torture chamber? Uncle Lee nodded grimly. Many people died there. When the British came back after the war, they found terrible things. They tried to seal it all up, built the school on top, made the lake as a cover for the tunnel entrance. But it's still there, Darren said. The tunnel, the basement, it's all still there. The basement is permanently locked. Many chains, many locks. No one goes there. The tunnel, they tried to collapse it, but... He shrugged. Old things have a way of remaining. I had to ask. Uncle Lee, have you ever heard sounds coming from the lake or from the basement? Something flickered across his face, recognition and fear. What kind of sounds, boy? His voice had dropped even lower. Like groaning and laughing. I heard it last night. Uncle Lee's hands tightened on his broom. For the first time since I'd known him, his smile completely disappeared. I was there, you know, he said, after a long pause. 26 years ago, a group of curious students just like you two. They found the hole, wanted to explore. I was younger then, foolish. I thought, why not? Let them see a piece of history. You went into the tunnel? Darren asked, eyes wide. We followed it all the way to the old auditorium basement. The door was chained, but there was a small window in it. The students wanted to look inside. Uncle Lee's voice had become mechanical, like he was reciting something he'd rehearsed but didn't want to say. I should never have let them. What did you see? I whispered. Uncle Lee suddenly straightened up, his expression closing off. Nothing. There was nothing to see. Just an old room. We left immediately. But I have work to do, he cut me off abruptly. You boys should forget about the lake, about the hole. Some places keep their pain. Some memories are too strong to die. Do you understand me? Before we could respond, he turned and walked away, his shoulders hunched, sweeping with more vigor than necessary. He's hiding something, Darren said as we watched him go. Whatever they saw in that basement scared him, I agreed, even after all these years. That night I couldn't sleep. The camp was continuing for 3 days, and we were all staying in the school hall. Around 2 a.m, I gave up trying to fall asleep and decided to go to the bathroom. The hall was dark, except for the exit signs casting a red glow over the sleeping bodies of my schoolmates. On my way back from the bathroom, I passed by a window that overlooked the lake. I don't know what made me stop and look out. Maybe some subconscious pull. The lake was even more still than the night before, like black mirror under the moonlight. And the hole was there, perfectly visible even from this distance, like a dark eye staring up at the night sky. As I watched, I heard it again, that groaning sound. Louder this time, unmistakable. It wasn't coming from the lake, though. It was coming from somewhere inside the building. Something compelled me to follow the sound. I moved through the dark corridors, my heart pounding in my chest. The groans led me toward the old auditorium, the place Uncle Lee had mentioned, where the basement would be. I'd been in the auditorium countless times for school assemblies, never knowing what lay beneath it. As I approached, I noticed the doors were slightly ajar. Strange, since they were always locked at night. The groaning had stopped, but now I could hear that laughter, soft at first, then building. It was coming from inside. I pushed the door open wider and stepped into the darkness of the auditorium. The emergency exit signs provided just enough light to make out the rows of seats and the stage at the front. But the sound wasn't coming from there. It was coming from below. At the side of the stage, there was a door I'd never noticed before. It was plain and unmarked, but as I got closer, I could see it was heavily secured with multiple chains and padlocks, just as Uncle Lee had described. The laughter was louder now, right behind that door, and voices, multiple voices, speaking in Japanese. I stood frozen before the chained door, unable to move forward or retreat. Then the laughter stopped abruptly, and a single voice spoke clearly, as if its owner was standing right next to me. "We've been waiting for someone like you." I ran. I ran faster than I've ever run in my life, back through the auditorium, through the dark corridors, all the way back to the hall where I threw myself onto my sleeping bag, shaking uncontrollably. The next morning, I convinced myself it had been a nightmare. It had to be. But when I went to the auditorium during free time, I found the side door exactly where I'd seen it in my dream, heavily chained and padlocked. I never told anyone else what happened that night. We left the camp the following day, and I avoided looking at the lake as we departed. But sometimes when I close my eyes, I can still hear that voice, feel the presence behind the door. Uncle Lee retired the next semester. No explanation, just didn't show up one day. When I asked about him, the administration said he'd moved to Malaysia to live with his daughter. I don't know what happened in that basement 26 years ago. I don't know what Uncle Lee and those students saw, but whatever it was bad enough that he kept the secret for decades, only to be rattled when Darren and I asked about it. I graduated from Chongqing High a year ago. I've never gone back. But sometimes I look up the school online, at the pictures of that beautiful lake with its fountains running in the daylight, surrounded by smiling students who have no idea what lies beneath the surface, or what comes out when the water is still. Story 11. I've never told this story to anyone except my husband. Even now, 5 years later, I break out in a cold sweat just thinking about what happened. I doubt anyone will believe me, but I need to get this off my chest. I've always had this weird phobia, submechanophobia, a fear of human-made objects underwater. Shipwrecks, submerged statues, even pool drains freak me out. I can't explain why, but the thought of touching something man-made underwater makes my skin crawl. Despite this, I love paddleboarding. Contradictory, I know. Back in July of 2018, my husband Jake and I went camping in the Sierra Nevada mountains. We found this gorgeous alpine lake that looked like something off a postcard. Crystal clear water surrounded by pine trees and granite mountains. The water was so clear you could see at least 30 feet down in some spots. We set up our tent at a small campsite about 50 yards from the shore. Jake wanted to hike that day, but I couldn't resist the lake. It was a perfect paddleboarding spot, and there was barely anyone around, just a couple of kayakers on the far side. I convinced Jake I'd be fine alone while he explored some nearby trails. "I'll be back in 3 hours," he said. "You sure you'll be okay out there by yourself?" I remember rolling my eyes. "It's a lake, not the ocean. I'll stay where I can see the shore." God, I wish I'd gone hiking with him instead. The lake was peaceful that morning. The water was cold but not unbearable. I paddled along the shoreline for about an hour, just taking in the scenery. I felt completely at ease. Then I noticed this small island about a quarter mile from shore. Just a chunk of granite rising out of the water. Something about it caught my attention. Maybe it was how isolated it looked. Or maybe it was the fact that I could see what looked like a plastic chair on it. Yeah, a white plastic chair, the kind you'd have on a patio. I remember thinking how weird it was to see that chair out there. Who would drag a plastic chair all the way to an island on a remote alpine lake? But I was curious, so I decided to paddle over to check it out. As I moved away from the shoreline and into deeper water, something changed. The feeling was so sudden it made me wobble on my board. It was like someone had flipped a switch in my brain from peaceful to something is terribly wrong. My heart started racing for no reason at all. There was nothing around me, no boats, no people, not even a fish I could see. Just crystal clear water beneath me, getting deeper and darker blue the further I went. I tried to shake it off. I've had anxiety before, and I told myself that's all this was. But this felt different, more primal. Like my body was reacting to something my conscious mind couldn't perceive. The island was still about 200 yards away. I could see the chair clearly now. Definitely a white plastic patio chair sitting facing the water. I kept paddling, but the feeling of dread just intensified with every stroke. My hands were sweating despite the cool mountain air. I kept looking down into the water, half expecting to see something. But there was nothing there except crystal clear water turning to darkness as it got deeper. That's when I felt it, the distinct sensation of being watched, not from the shoreline or the island ahead, but from below. I know how that sounds, but I swear on everything I care about. Something was watching me from under the water. I almost turned back right then, but I was nearly to the island, and honestly, I was suddenly terrified of being in the middle of the lake. At least the island was solid ground, so I kept going, paddling faster now, my arms burning with the effort. When I finally reached the island, I practically threw myself off the board onto the granite. It was small, maybe 30 feet across, just a flat slab of rock with some scrubby bushes and that weird plastic chair. I pulled my board up beside me and sat down on the rock, trying to catch my breath and calm my nerves. That's when I realized the feeling hadn't gone away. If anything, it was stronger. I was on solid ground, but I felt more exposed, more vulnerable than I had on the water, like I had walked into a trap. The chair was about 10 feet away from me. Up close, it looked old and weathered, like it had been there for years, which made no sense in a place that was covered in snow half the year. There were no markings on it, no signs that anyone had been there recently. It was just there, facing the water, waiting. I couldn't bring myself to sit in it or even touch it. Instead, I walked to the other side of the island, where I could see a small waterfall cascading down the mountain into the lake. The roar of the water should have been comforting, but all it did was remind me how isolated I was. Jake was miles away by now. If I screamed, no one would hear me over that waterfall. I spent maybe 15 minutes on that island trying to convince myself I was being ridiculous. But every second there felt wrong, like I was trespassing in someone else's space. Someone or something that didn't want me there. When I couldn't take it anymore, I decided to head back. I dragged my board to the water, my hands shaking so badly I almost dropped it. The trip back looked impossibly long. I'd have to cross the deepest part of the lake, where the water was so dark I couldn't see the bottom. I got on my board and started paddling. Every muscle in my body was tense, waiting for, I don't know what. A hand grabbing my ankle, something rising from the depths. Nothing made sense, but everything felt dangerous. I was about halfway back when I looked down and saw nothing but blackness below me. The water was probably 100 feet deep at that point. I froze, completely froze. I couldn't move, couldn't paddle, could barely breathe. The feeling of being watched was overwhelming now. Whatever had been observing me was right beneath me, in that darkness. Then I saw it, or thought I saw it. A movement in the deep, just a shadow, a shifting of the darkness. It could have been a fish, or a trick of the light, or my imagination running wild. But in that moment, I knew it was none of those things. It was something looking back at me. I've never moved so fast in my life. I paddled like I was being chased, because in my mind, I was. My arms burned, my chest heaved, but I didn't stop until I reached the shore. I fell off my board into the shallow water, scraping my knees on the rocks, but I didn't care. I dragged my board up onto the beach and collapsed. I must have sat there for 20 minutes, just trembling and trying not to throw up. A family with kids showed up and started setting up for a picnic nearby, acting so normal it made me question everything I'd just felt. How could they be so casual when there was something in that lake? I made my way back to our campsite and waited for Jake. When he finally returned, I broke down crying. He thought I'd hurt myself and kept checking me for injuries. How could I explain that I was terrified of something I couldn't even name, that I'd felt watched by something in a lake where I could see there was nothing there? There was this chair, I kept saying, a plastic chair on the island. Who would put a chair out there? Why would anyone do that? Jake tried to calm me down, but I insisted we leave. We packed up our stuff and drove 3 hours to find a motel. I couldn't spend another minute near that lake. For weeks afterward, I had nightmares about being in dark water, something circling beneath me. I tried researching the lake, looking for stories about accidents or strange sightings, but found nothing unusual. It's a popular spot for hiking and fishing. People swim there, kids swim there, but I know what I felt. And sometimes, late at night, I still wonder about that chair. Who put it there? Was it facing the water so whatever lives in the lake could sit and watch the people on the shore? Or was it placed as a lure to draw curious people like me out to the deep water? I've given up paddleboarding. Jake thinks it's because I fell and got scared, and I let him believe that. It's easier than telling him I'm convinced something supernatural was waiting for me in that alpine lake, something that watched me from below and followed me to that island, something that wanted me to stay just a little longer, to venture just a little deeper. I don't know what would have happened if I'd sat in that chair. I don't know what was moving in the darkness beneath my board, but I know my body recognized the danger before my mind could process it. That primal fear saved me from something. I still sometimes wonder if I imagined the whole thing, if it was just an anxiety attack combined with my existing phobia. But then I remember the absolute certainty I felt in that moment, the knowledge that something was there, watching and waiting. We've been back to the Sierra Nevada many times since then. Jake loves it there, but I never go near the lakes anymore. And I've never told anyone else this story until now. Who would believe me? I barely believe it myself, but I know what I felt that day. Something was waiting for me in that lake, and sometimes I think it's still waiting, patient and ancient, for someone else to paddle out too far from shore to that island with its weathered plastic chair. Story 12. I still can't believe we were stupid enough to stay there. It's been 3 months, and I still have nightmares about that night at Bjurholm Nature Reserve. I'm 18, and I've never experienced anything as terrifying as what happened during that camping trip with my parents and my friend Anna. It was supposed to be a fun weekend in July. My parents had planned this camping trip to this beautiful nature reserve on the east coast of Sweden. Anna and I were excited because the reserve has this amazing beach that's supposed to be really scenic and peaceful. We packed all our camping gear into my dad's Volvo and drove about 2 hours from Stockholm. When we got there around 4 in the afternoon, we realized we had a problem. There was some local soccer tournament happening that weekend, and all the official campsites were completely full. We drove around for almost an hour looking for somewhere to set up our tents. My dad was getting frustrated, and Mom kept saying maybe we should just drive back home, but we'd come all this way already. Eventually, we found this small gravel parking lot near a trail that led both to the forest and down to a secluded part of the beach. It wasn't an official camping spot, but my dad figured it would be fine for one night and we could move to a proper campsite the next day if one opened up. When we pulled in, I noticed there was only one other vehicle there, this beat-up old Saab that had definitely seen better days. It was kind of weird because it looked abandoned. The paint was peeling, one of the windows was cracked, and it had mud all over it. I remember thinking it was strange that someone would leave a car like that in a nature reserve, but I didn't think much more about it at the time. We set up our tents about 30 meters from the parking lot in a small clearing at the edge of the forest. My parents had their own tent, and Anna and I shared the second one. We cooked dinner on our portable stove, grilled some sausages, and made s'mores. It was actually really nice, and for a while, we forgot about the weird car and the fact that we weren't supposed to be camping there. As it got dark, my parents went to their tent around 10, but Anna and I stayed up. We were just talking and scrolling on our phones. The cell reception was terrible, but we could still get occasional messages through. Around midnight, we were still awake when we heard something from the direction of the parking lot. It was a metallic sound, like someone had dropped a set of keys on the ground. Then we heard what sounded like a car door opening. Anna and I went quiet and listened. We could hear shuffling, then what sounded like something heavy being placed in the trunk of a car. A few seconds later, an engine started, and we heard the car drive away fast, tires screeching on the gravel. "That was weird," Anna whispered. "Do you think that was the old Saab?" I peeked out of the tent, but it was too dark to see much. The car was definitely gone, though. About 15 minutes later, my phone pinged. It was my friend Eric, who lives near the reserve. He'd seen my Instagram story from earlier in the day where I'd tagged our location. His message made my stomach drop. "Dude, are you guys camping at the North Beach? That area is sketchy AF. There's been rumors about some gang activity there, people dropping off packages at night. Be careful." I showed Anna the message, and we both got really uneasy. What if that sound we heard was someone dropping off drugs or something worse? I texted Eric back, asking for more details, but the message wouldn't send. The reception had gotten even worse. We were debating whether to wake up my parents when we heard it, a scream from somewhere in the woods. It wasn't like an animal or anything. It was definitely human, and it sounded desperate. It was the kind of scream that makes your blood freeze. It lasted maybe 3 seconds and then just stopped. "What the fuck was that?" Anna grabbed my arm so hard it hurt. "I don't know," I whispered. My heart was racing. "I'm calling my mom." I called my mom's phone and she answered after a few rings. She sounded groggy, like I'd woken her up. "Mikael, what's wrong?" "Did you hear that scream?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "What scream?" "We were asleep," she said. "Are you two okay?" I explained what we'd heard, both the car and the scream. She said she hadn't heard anything but would wake up Dad. She told us to stay in our tent and that she'd call us right back. While waiting for her call, Anna and I sat in complete silence, straining to hear any other sounds. The forest was eerily quiet now. No birds, no wind, nothing. Just this heavy silence that felt like it was pressing down on us. Then we heard it, footsteps. Someone was walking on the gravel path near our tents, slow, deliberate steps. They weren't trying to be quiet either. It sounded like they were walking around our campsite, circling it. I put my finger to my lips, signaling Anna to be absolutely silent. My phone was still in my hand, but I was afraid to call my mom again in case the person outside heard me talking. The footsteps stopped right outside our tent. I could hear breathing, heavy and irregular. Whoever it was, they were standing right there, just a thin layer of fabric between us and them. I've never been so terrified in my life. I was sure they could hear my heart pounding. Anna was silently crying next to me, tears streaming down her face. We both sat completely still, hardly daring to breathe. After what felt like forever but was probably only a minute or two, the footsteps moved away, heading toward the parking lot where my dad's car was parked. I heard what sounded like someone trying the car door handle, then walking around it. Just when I thought things couldn't get worse, we saw headlights sweep across our tent as a car pulled into the parking lot. The engine cut off, and car doors opened and closed. There were voices, at least two people talking in hushed tones. I couldn't make out what they were saying. Then one of them said something louder, sounding angry. There was more movement, car doors again, and the engine started. The headlights swept across our tent once more as the car turned around and drove away. About 5 minutes later, another vehicle came speeding down the road, this one with a siren. A police car. It drove right past the parking lot in the same direction as the other car had gone. My phone vibrated. My mom was calling back. I answered as quietly as I could. "Mikhail," she whispered, "someone just walked around our tent. Your father thinks we should leave right now." "There's someone outside," I whispered back, "and a car just came and left, then a police car." "Stay absolutely quiet," she said. "Don't move. Your father is going to call emergency services." We ended the call, and Anna and I huddled together in the sleeping bag, not daring to make a sound. Every snap of a twig or rustle of leaves made us jump. I kept thinking I heard footsteps again, but it might have just been my imagination at that point. We stayed like that all night, neither of us sleeping a wink. The sky started to lighten around 4 in the morning, and by 5, it was bright enough to see clearly outside. My parents came to our tent, both looking as exhausted and scared as we felt. "Did you hear them come back?" my mom asked, her voice shaking. "No," I said. "You mean the person walking around?" She nodded. "Someone was walking around our tent too. I could hear them breathing. Your father wanted to confront them, but I was afraid they might have a weapon. My dad had managed to get through to the police, who told him they'd send someone to check on us, but no one ever came. Maybe they thought it wasn't a priority, or maybe they got distracted by whatever they were chasing earlier. We packed up our stuff as fast as humanly possible. Nobody talked much. We just wanted to get out of there." As we loaded the car, I noticed the old Saab was back in the parking lot. It looked exactly the same as yesterday, like it had never moved, but I knew what I'd heard. On the drive home, we tried to make sense of what happened. My mom thought it might have been locals trying to scare off campers who weren't supposed to be there. My dad suggested maybe poachers or someone up to no good in the woods. Anna was convinced it was drug dealers, based on Eric's text. When I got home, I started researching. I looked up news about Bjorholm Reserve, and what I found made me feel sick. 2 months earlier, a man had been found dead in the forest near the North Beach, shot in the head. The police suspected it was gang-related. And get this, 2 other men had disappeared from that same shoreline over the past year. They were never found. I think we camped in the middle of some kind of crime scene or drop-off point. I think whoever came back that night was checking to see if we had witnessed something we shouldn't have. Sometimes I wonder what was in that trunk and whose scream we heard in the woods. I still get messages from Eric sometimes asking if I ever found out what happened that night. I never tell him how bad it really was. I don't want to think about it, but I can't forget it either. Every time I close my eyes, I can still hear those footsteps circling our tent and that heavy breathing right outside the thin fabric, just inches from my head. Story 13. I've had this story bottled up inside me for almost 4 years now, and I need to get it out. I'm still not sure what happened that night, and honestly, writing this down is making my hands sweat all over again. I keep telling myself there must be a logical explanation, but I just don't see it. Back in 2019, I was driving from Austin back to my home in Louisiana. It was a long drive, and I'd been putting in extra hours at work before taking some vacation days, so I was already exhausted before even starting the 13-hour journey. About an hour and a half outside of Austin, I remembered that my old friend Tom had moved to a small town in that area a few years back. We'd been close in high school but drifted apart during college. You know how it goes. On impulse, I looked him up and gave him a call, wondering if he'd be up for a quick coffee before I continued my drive. Tom sounded genuinely excited to hear from me and insisted I stop by his place. "You can't drive all the way to Louisiana tonight, man. You'll fall asleep at the wheel. Just crash at my place and head out fresh in the morning," he said. It made sense. I was already yawning every few minutes, and the thought of a break was appealing. I punched his address into my GPS and arrived at his house about 40 minutes later. Tom's place was this old 2-story house that had definitely seen better days. The white paint was peeling in places, and the front porch had that slight sag you see in homes built in the 40s or 50s. But it had character, as they say. Tom greeted me with a huge bear hug like no time had passed at all. "Damn, it's good to see you," he kept saying as he showed me around. He lived alone, having gone through a divorce a year earlier. The inside of the house was surprisingly well kept compared to the exterior. Hardwood floors, decent furniture, just a bit cluttered in that bachelor pad way. We spent the evening catching up over whiskey, probably more whiskey than was wise. Tom had always been the fun friend who pushed for just one more, and that night was no exception. We talked about old friends, reminisced about stupid things we'd done in high school, and filled each other in on the last decade of our lives. It felt good, natural, like slipping back into an old, comfortable routine. By midnight, I was definitely drunk, my words slurring slightly as we laughed about some forgotten prank from senior year. Tom showed me to the guest room upstairs, a simple room with a double bed, a dresser, and a small closet. The walls were a faded blue, and there was a single window with thin curtains that let in the moonlight. I remember noting the wooden floors that creaked as we walked across them. "Bathroom's right across the hall," Tom said. "Help yourself to anything you need. I'll probably be up for another hour or so if you need anything." I thanked him, too tired and drunk to do anything but kick off my shoes and collapse onto the bed. I think I was asleep before my head even hit the pillow. I woke up suddenly sometime later. My mouth was dry as sandpaper, and my head was spinning slightly from the alcohol. The room was dark except for the pale moonlight filtering through the thin curtains. I blinked, disoriented, trying to remember where I was. It took me a moment to recall I was in Tom's guest room. As my eyes adjusted to the darkness, I noticed something in the corner of the room, between the dresser and the wall. It looked like a black garment bag hanging there. You know, the kind you use to store suits or formal dresses. Except, something about it seemed off. The shape didn't look quite right. It was wider at the top, almost like a person with hair, and it wasn't hanging flat against the wall the way a garment bag should. It was more like a silhouette, just standing there in the corner. My heart immediately started pounding. I told myself I was being stupid, that it was just a coat or something that Tom had forgotten to mention. Maybe he'd hung it there while I was asleep, but the longer I stared at it, the more wrong it looked. It didn't move at all, not even the slight sway you'd expect from air circulation in an old house. I tried to rationalize it. I was drunk. The room was dark. My eyes were playing tricks on me. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. I squeezed my eyes shut, telling myself to just go back to sleep. After a few minutes of lying there with my heart racing, I must have dozed off again from sheer exhaustion. The next time I woke up, it was to the sound of a soft creaking, the unmistakable sound of careful footsteps on old wooden floors. My eyes shot open, and I immediately looked to the corner where I'd seen the garment bag. It was gone. A wave of cold panic washed over me. I sat bolt upright in bed, straining my eyes in the darkness, searching every corner of the room. Nothing. I reached over and fumbled for my phone on the bedside table, turning on the flashlight with shaking hands. The beam swept across an empty room. No garment bag, no silhouette, just an ordinary guest room with nowhere to hide. My mind was racing. Had I dreamed it? Was I still drunk? Or had someone been standing in that corner watching me sleep, and now they were moving around the house? I got out of bed, my legs unsteady beneath me. The wooden floor was cold against my bare feet as I crept to the door. I hesitated, my hand on the doorknob, listening. The house was silent now. Taking a deep breath, I opened the door and peeked out into the hallway. It was empty, lit only by a small nightlight plugged into an outlet near the bathroom. I stepped out, flinching as the floor creaked beneath my weight. "Tom?" I called out, my voice barely above a whisper. No response. I made my way down the hall to Tom's room, each step making the floorboards announce my presence. His door was partially open. I pushed it wider and saw him sprawled across his bed, snoring softly. "Tom," I said, louder this time. He didn't stir. "Tom!" I reached out and shook his shoulder. He jerked awake, looking confused. "What? What's happening?" he mumbled, sitting up and rubbing his eyes. "I saw something in my room," I said, aware of how childish that sounded. "A black garment bag or something, standing in the corner. But when I woke up again, it was gone." Tom stared at me, still half asleep. "A garment bag? I don't have a garment bag." "Well, there was something in the corner of the room," I insisted, like a person-shaped shadow, and then I heard footsteps, and when I looked again, it was gone. He sighed and switched on his bedside lamp. "You're freaking me out, man. We're both drunk. You probably had a weird dream." "It wasn't a dream," I said firmly. "There was something there, and now it's not, and I heard footsteps." Tom got up, pulling on a t-shirt. "All right, let's check it out." We searched the guest room first, turning on all the lights. There was nothing unusual. No garment bag, no place where one could have been hanging. The closet was empty except for a few wire hangers. We checked under the bed, behind the dresser, everywhere someone could hide. "There's nothing here," Tom said, "and I don't have any clothes hanging in this room." "I know what I saw," I insisted. though doubt was beginning to creep in. Had I hallucinated the whole thing? We searched the rest of the house next. Every room, every closet. We checked all the doors and windows, all locked from the inside. There was no sign that anyone had broken in, no evidence that anyone other than us had been in the house. "Look," Tom said finally as we stood in his kitchen. "This house is old. It makes noises sometimes, and we were drinking pretty heavily. You probably had a hypnagogic hallucination. You know, those weird things you see when you're half asleep." I wanted to believe him. It made sense logically. But I couldn't shake the vivid image of that silhouette in the corner, the way it had seemed to be watching me, and the footsteps. I knew I hadn't imagined those. "Maybe," I conceded, not wanting to argue. "Sorry for waking you up?" "It's fine," Tom said, though I could tell he was annoyed. "Let's try to get some sleep." I returned to the guest room, but I couldn't bring myself to turn off the lights. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, jumping at every creak and groan of the old house. I didn't sleep again that night. When dawn finally came, I got up, packed my things, and went downstairs. Tom was already in the kitchen making coffee. "You look like hell," he commented, handing me a mug. "Didn't sleep much," I admitted. "Listen, I'm going to head out early, get a jump on the drive." He frowned. "Because of last night? Come on, man, it was nothing." I know, it's not that," I lied. "I just want to beat the traffic." Tom didn't believe me. I could see it in his face, but he didn't push it. We said our goodbyes, promising to keep in better touch, though in the back of my mind, I already knew I wouldn't be visiting again. As I drove away, I kept checking my rearview mirror, half expecting to see that black silhouette somehow following me. The rational part of my brain kept insisting it had been a dream or my drunk mind playing tricks on me. Maybe Tom was right about hypnagogic hallucinations. But here's the thing that still bothers me, the detail I can't explain away. When I was packing up that morning, I noticed something on the hardwood floor in the corner where I'd seen the figure. It was barely visible, just a few small dark marks that looked like, I don't know, like something wet had dripped and dried there. I've gone over that night 1,000 times in my head. Was it just a dream? Did Tom play some kind of sick prank that he never admitted to? Or was someone actually in that house watching me sleep, who decided to leave before dawn broke? I still don't know. And that's what scares me most. Story 14. I've been a delivery driver for about 3 years now, mostly working the dinner rush for DoorDash in Palmeiras. The pay isn't great, but I'm saving up for school, and the flexibility works with my schedule. I usually wrap up around 10 or 11 at night, but last Friday, I decided to push for a few more deliveries since it had been slow earlier in the day. It was around 11:30 when I got a ping for a McDonald's order. I was tired and ready to head home, but the guaranteed payout was $18 for what looked like a short drive. I accepted it without checking the details too carefully, something I deeply regret now. I picked up the order from the 24-hour McDonald's on Central Avenue. 2 McDoubles, a large fry, and a Coke, standard late-night stuff. The girl at the drive-through window looked half asleep as she handed me the bag. I remember thinking how I'd be joining her in dreamland soon enough. I punched the address into my GPS and headed out. After about 10 minutes, I realized we were heading toward the old business district near the railroad tracks. I've lived in Palmeiras my whole life, but I'd rarely had deliveries to this area, especially not this late. Most of these buildings are offices that close at 5 or warehouses that shut down years ago when the economy tanked. As I turned onto Willow Street, The street lights became fewer and farther between. My headlights swept across overgrown parking lots and buildings with faded signs. The whole place had this abandoned feel that made my skin crawl. I slowed down, double-checking the address on my phone. According to the app, I was getting close. The GPS directed me to turn onto a narrow service road that ran behind a row of buildings. The asphalt was cracked with weeds growing through, and my car bumped along uncomfortably. I had to slow to a crawl to avoid bottoming out in some of the deeper potholes. "You have arrived at your destination," my phone announced, and I stopped beside what looked like the back of a 3-story office building. There were no lights on that I could see, just the dull glow of a single security lamp casting shadows on an empty parking area. No other cars were visible. I sat there for a moment, engine idling, wondering if I had the wrong address. The place looked completely shut down. I checked the delivery notes again. "Leave at door, will tip in cash." Just as I was about to call the customer, my phone pinged with a message through the app. "I see you've arrived. Use the green metal door around the corner." I felt a little relief. At least someone was actually here. I grabbed the food bag, turned off my engine, and got out. The night air was unusually still and quiet. No traffic sounds, no distant voices, just the faint hum of crickets and the occasional rustle of leaves. I turned on my phone flashlight and walked toward the corner of the building. I found the door easily enough, but it wasn't green. It was red. A plain metal door with no windows or markings set into the brick wall. No doorbell or intercom that I could see. I hesitated, checking my phone again to make sure I had the right place. Another message appeared. "Just leave the food inside the door. I'm in a meeting and can't come down right now." Something felt off, but I told myself I was being paranoid. Maybe the door had been repainted since the customer had last been here. Maybe they were working late in one of these offices. Still, what kind of meeting happens at midnight in an empty building? I tested the door handle, and to my surprise, it turned easily. I pushed it open a few inches, revealing a dimly lit hallway with what looked like emergency lighting, casting a weak yellow glow. The air that escaped smelled musty, like old carpet and dust. "Hello?" I called out, but my voice just echoed down the empty corridor. I pushed the door wider and took a step inside, thinking I'd just set the food down and leave. That's when I heard it, the distinct click of the door locking behind me. I spun around and grabbed the handle, yanking hard, but it wouldn't budge. Panic shot through me like an electric current. I pounded on the door, calling out, "Hey, the door locked. Can someone open this?" No response. My heart was hammering now. I pulled out my phone to call the customer, but there was no signal inside the building. The app showed the order as delivered, even though I still had the food bag clutched in my hand. That's when I heard it, footsteps somewhere deeper in the building. Heavy, deliberate steps moving in my direction. "Hello?" I called out again, my voice cracking. "I'm just delivering your McDonald's." The footsteps paused, then resumed, faster now. Every instinct screamed at me to run. I abandoned the food bag and moved quickly down the hallway, away from the approaching steps. The emergency lights created pools of sickly yellow illumination every 15 feet or so, with darkness between. I passed what looked like conference rooms and offices, all empty, chairs pushed under desks like everyone had just stepped out for lunch and never returned. The footsteps behind me picked up pace. Whoever it was wasn't even trying to be quiet anymore. I heard what sounded like keys jangling, or maybe a tool belt, and something dragging along the wall. I turned a corner and found myself facing a bank of elevators. I jabbed frantically at the call button, but the panel remained dark. Of course they wouldn't work. I looked around desperately and spotted a stairwell door to my right. I shoved it open and slipped inside just as the footsteps rounded the corner behind me. The stairwell was almost completely dark, with only tiny emergency lights marking each landing. I moved as quietly as I could up to the second floor, praying the door wouldn't be locked. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely turn the handle, but it opened, and I slipped through into another hallway, similar to the one below. I needed to hide and think. The second floor was laid out in an open office plan with cubicles. I ducked into one and crouched down, trying to control my breathing. My phone still showed no signal, but I opened the camera anyway and switched to video mode. If something happened to me, maybe someone would find my phone and see what I'd recorded. Through the thin cubicle walls, I heard the stairwell door open and close. The footsteps were slower now, methodical, searching. I could hear heavy breathing and what sounded like muttering. I stayed perfectly still, my legs cramping from the awkward position. Sweat ran down my back despite the cool air. The footsteps moved between the cubicles, getting closer. A flashlight beam swept across the ceiling. "I know you're here," a voice said softly. Male, I think. The words were slurred, almost dreamy. "The food's getting cold?" I bit my lip to keep from making a sound. The beam of light passed over the top of my cubicle, then moved on. The footsteps continued past me, heading toward the other end of the floor. As soon as they were far enough away, I slipped out and moved in the opposite direction, back toward the stairwell. My plan was simple. Get downstairs, find another exit, get the hell out of this building, and call the police. I made it to the stairwell and eased the door open, wincing at the slight creak. The footsteps behind me suddenly stopped, then started moving rapidly back in my direction. "Wait!" the voice called. "I just want to talk." I didn't wait. I flew down the stairs, taking them two at a time, nearly falling in my haste. I burst back onto the first floor and ran down the hallway, trying doors as I went. All locked. The red metal door I'd entered through was at the far end, and I knew it was locked from the inside, too. A crash from the stairwell told me my pursuer had stumbled in their hurry. I had maybe seconds. I spotted a corridor branching off to the right and took it without hesitation. At the end was another door, metal with a push bar. An exit sign glowed dimly above it. I hit the bar with both hands, expecting an alarm, not caring. To my relief, it opened easily, and I stumbled out into the night air. I was now on the side of the building, in a narrow alley between two structures. Without looking back, I ran toward the street, fumbling with my phone to call 911. 911, what's your emergency? Someone trapped me in a building, I gasped, still running. I'm a delivery driver. They locked me in. They were chasing me. The dispatcher kept me on the line while I made it back to my car. I locked the doors and drove to the main road, where I was told to wait for officers to arrive. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the steering wheel. It took 20 minutes for a police car to reach me. By then, I had somewhat composed myself, though my heart was still racing. 2 officers took my statement, looking increasingly concerned as I explained what had happened. "That building's been partially abandoned for 5 or 6 years now," one officer told me. "The property management company maintains it minimally, but there's no active businesses in there after the tech company on the 3rd floor moved out last year." "But someone was in there," I insisted. "Someone sent me messages telling me to come inside." The officers went to investigate while I waited in my car. They returned about 15 minutes later. "We didn't find anyone," the older officer said. "The door you described was locked when we got there. We had to contact the property manager to let us in. We searched all 3 floors. There's no one there, though we did find the McDonald's bag you mentioned in the hallway. What about security cameras? I asked. The system hasn't been operational for years, he replied. Budget cuts. They took me seriously enough to file a report, but I could tell. They thought I might be exaggerating or confused. They suggested someone might have been squatting in the building and gotten spooked when I entered. But I know what happened. Someone lured me there deliberately. They knew a delivery driver would be vulnerable, alone, at night, in an unfamiliar location. They messaged me about a green door when the door was actually red, just to make sure I'd enter the right one. They locked me in and hunted me through that building. I quit DoorDash the next day. No amount of money is worth that kind of risk. I keep thinking about what might have happened if I hadn't found that exit door, or if it had been locked like all the others. My face would have ended up on a missing persons poster, another delivery driver who disappeared without a trace. I drive past that building sometimes during daylight hours. It looks so ordinary, so harmless. But I know what waits inside after dark. I know someone out there is probably trying the same trick on other drivers, other vulnerable people just trying to make a living. So if you're doing deliveries and get an order to a strange location late at night, please check the details carefully. Trust your instincts, and never, ever enter a building alone, no matter what the customer tells you. Some doors are meant to stay closed. Story 15. It was late July, monsoon season in the Southwest. I was hauling industrial equipment from Denver to Las Vegas, taking State Route 191 through southern Utah. If you've never been through the Utah Badlands, there's something else. All these strange rock formations and cracked earth that make you feel like you're driving on another planet. During the day, it's beautiful in its own harsh way. At night, it's just eerie. I'd been driving since 4 in the morning, and it was getting close to 10 at night. The weather forecast had mentioned scattered thunderstorms, but what rolled in wasn't scattered. It was biblical. 1 minute the sky was clear with stars everywhere. The next, it was like someone flipped a switch and all hell broke loose. The rain came down so hard I could barely see past my hood ornament. My windshield wipers were going at full speed, but might as well have been toothpicks for all the good they were doing. I had to slow my rig down to about 15 miles per hour, and even that felt risky. The road was quickly turning into a river. Lightning was striking everywhere, lighting up those weird rock formations in these quick, blue-white flashes that made them look like they were moving. The thunder was so loud it was actually shaking my cab. I've been through plenty of storms in my time on the road, but this one felt different, more intense, more, personal somehow. I white-knuckled the steering wheel, leaning forward like that extra 3 inches was going to help me see better. My dispatcher had been crackling in and out on the radio for the last hour before I lost the signal completely. Cell service out there is a joke on good days, and during a storm like this, forget about it. I was completely alone. About 20 miles south of Blanding, the road takes this sharp bend around a massive rock formation. As I carefully navigated the turn, squinting through the rain, I saw something that made me slam on my brakes. Thank God there was nobody behind me. There, stretched across the barren landscape, was a wall of fire. Not a small fire, not a campfire gone wrong, but a massive inferno that seemed to stretch for hundreds of yards in every direction. The flames were easily 20 feet high, maybe higher in some spots. At first, my brain couldn't process what I was seeing. Fire doesn't just burn in the middle of nowhere, especially not during a monsoon downpour. It was like watching oil burn on water, an impossible contradiction. The rain was coming down in sheets, yet this hellish blaze was roaring like it was being fed by something. I sat there, engine idling, just staring at it. The heat was incredible. Even through my closed windows and with the AC running, I could feel it radiating against my face. It was like opening an oven door, that initial blast of hot air that makes you step back. Except I couldn't step back. What was burning? There was nothing out there but rock and dirt. The Badlands are basically a desert. Scrub brush, rocks, and dusty soil. There's nothing that should burn like that, especially not in a rainstorm. After the initial shock wore off, I realized I needed to keep moving. I couldn't sit there all night, and I couldn't turn around on that narrow road with my 18-wheeler. The fire was mostly off to the right side of the highway, though some flames licked dangerously close to the asphalt. I figured my best bet was to drive past it as quickly as I safely could. I put my rig in gear and started to move forward, keeping as far to the left of my lane as possible. As I drove parallel to the blaze, the cab of my truck became unbearably hot. The side of my face felt like it was sunburning in real time. I had to squint because the light was so intense, a stark contrast to the pitch-black night I'd been driving through. That's when I noticed something that made my blood run cold. Within the flames, and I swear this on my life, there appeared to be a shape. Not just random patterns that your mind makes into something recognizable, but a definite form. It looked like the outline of a truck, a big one, similar to mine. I slowed down even more, straining to see through the wall of fire. There was definitely something in there. A tanker truck, I thought, flipped on its side. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. This was a crash. Some poor bastard had lost control in the storm and gone off the road. I pulled over about 50 yards past the fire and sat there, rain hammering on my roof, trying to think what to do. Should I go back? Try to help? But the heat was so intense I couldn't have gotten within 50 feet of the wreck. And if it was a tanker, probably propane from the way it was burning, the driver would already be... Well, I didn't want to think about it. I tried my radio again. Nothing but static. My cell phone showed no service. I was utterly alone with this hellish scene. That's when I saw it. Through my side mirror, in the flickering light of the flames, I could swear I saw a figure standing at the edge of the fire. Not inside it, but right at the perimeter, where the heat would still be unbearable. Just standing there, looking in my direction. I jerked my head around to look out my window, but between the rain streaking down the glass and the disorienting flashes of firelight, I couldn't tell if anyone was really there. I rolled down my window a crack, immediately getting blasted with hot air and rain, and yelled out, "Hey, you need help?" No response, just the roar of the fire and the pounding of the rain. I looked back at my mirror, and the figure seemed closer now, still at the edge of the flames, but somehow nearer to my truck. I couldn't make out any features, just a dark silhouette against the orange-red backdrop. Every instinct in my body was screaming at me to get out of there. Something wasn't right. The fire shouldn't be burning in that rain. That figure shouldn't be able to stand that close to the flames without burning up. And the way it moved, or didn't move, was unnatural. I put my truck in gear and started to pull away, my eyes fixed on my side mirror. The figure remained motionless as I began to move, but just as I was about to accelerate, I swear it raised its arm, as if waving or beckoning to me. I hit the gas harder than I meant to, my tires spinning slightly on the wet pavement before catching. I didn't slow down for the next 20 miles, despite the dangerous conditions. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. When I finally pulled into a truck stop in Monticello, I was shaking so badly I could barely turn off the engine. I sat there for a long time, trying to make sense of what I'd seen. The next morning, I asked the cashier at the truck stop if she'd heard anything about an accident down on 191. She said there had been a propane tanker that went off the road during the storm. The driver hadn't made it. They found the truck the next day, a charred hulk of metal in the Badlands. I nodded and paid for my coffee, not telling her I'd seen it happen. Not telling her about the impossible fire burning in the rain, and definitely not telling her about the figure standing in the flames. Over the next few days, I kept checking the local news online when I had service. They reported it as a straightforward accident. Driver lost control in the storm, tanker ruptured, gas ignited, open and shut case. Nothing unusual, but I know what I saw. Fire doesn't burn like that in a downpour, and whatever or whoever was standing at the edge of those flames wasn't natural. Sometimes when I'm driving through storms now, I catch myself scanning the roadside, half expecting to see flames licking up from the ground. And sometimes in my rearview mirror, I think I see a dark figure watching me go by. I tell myself it's just my imagination playing tricks, but deep down, I'm not so sure. I've taken a lot of routes since then, but I haven't been back on State Route 191. Some roads are better left untraveled, at least by me. I don't know if what I saw was something supernatural or just the trauma of witnessing something terrible, but either way, I can't shake the feeling that something was watching me from within that impossible inferno. Something that wanted me to stop. Something that I drove past and left behind. I still don't know if I did the right thing by driving away. Could I have helped? Was someone trying to signal me? Or was I right to listen to my gut and get the hell out of there? I guess I'll never know for sure. But on stormy nights when I'm driving, alone, I sometimes feel like I'm still being watched. And I keep my speed just a little above the limit, just in case something is trying to catch up to me from that night in the Utah Badlands. Story 16. I've been trying to process what happened to me last weekend for 5 days now, and I'm still not sleeping right. I keep hearing those footsteps in my dreams. I've never been the type to get spooked easily. I've been camping solo since I was 16, but this experience has me questioning whether I'll ever camp alone again. Pinewood Valley has always been my safe place. My dad first took me there when I was 8. It's this hidden little spot about 2 hours of hiking from the nearest access road, with a pristine lake surrounded by dense pine forest. The best part was always that nobody else seemed to know about it. In 15 years of going there, I've never once encountered another soul. Last Friday, I decided to take a long weekend to decompress after a brutal month at work. My girlfriend and I had just broken up, and I needed space to clear my head. Pinewood seemed like the perfect escape. No cell service, no people, just me and nature. The hike in was exactly what I needed. 2 hours of physical exertion through familiar terrain, the smell of pine needles baking in the afternoon sun, birds calling overhead. I reached my usual camping spot around 4 in the afternoon and set up quickly. It's this perfect little clearing about 20 feet from the shore, partially sheltered by a cluster of old pines, with a natural stone fire pit that's been there as long as I can remember. That first evening was perfect. I caught 2 decent-sized trout, cooked them over an open fire, and fell asleep under the stars, feeling more relaxed than I had in months. The lake was glass still, reflecting the moon so perfectly, it looked like you could step right into another world. Saturday morning, I woke to mist rising off the water. After coffee and oatmeal, I decided to walk the perimeter of the lake, something I've done countless times before. The lake isn't huge, maybe a mile around, and circling it has always been a sort of meditation for me. I'd already walked around it twice that morning, just soaking in the quiet and watching for wildlife. On my third loop, around 11 or so, something caught my eye that I hadn't noticed before. At first I thought I was imagining it, but as I got closer, there was no denying what I was seeing. Fresh, barefoot prints in the soft dirt near the tree line. I stopped, dead in my tracks. The prints were clear as day. 2 sets, one slightly larger than the other, and they hadn't been there during my previous walks. They came from the forest, went straight to the water's edge, and then returned to the woods. The soil was still slightly damp from morning dew, and the impressions looked fresh, maybe an hour old at most. My first thought was that maybe some hikers had found the spot, taken a quick dip, and moved on. But something about it felt wrong. No other signs of people, no gear, no trash, no disturbance of any kind. Just these pristine, barefoot prints appearing out of nowhere. I tried to shake it off, convincing myself they were probably just day hikers who wanted to feel the water. But the fact that I'd circled the lake multiple times and hadn't noticed them before kept nagging at me. I spent the rest of the day fishing and reading, but I couldn't stop glancing up every few minutes, scanning the tree line. The feeling of being watched crept over me slowly until it was practically crawling on my skin. As the sun started to set, I built up a bigger campfire than usual. Not that I was scared or anything, but it just felt right to have more light. I cooked dinner and tried to lose myself in my book, but the words kept blurring as my ears strained to catch any unusual sounds from the surrounding forest. The sun had been down for maybe an hour when I heard it, the unmistakable sound of footsteps approaching from the trees. Not animal footsteps, human, deliberate, slow. I grabbed my flashlight, but kept it pointed down, not wanting to seem hostile. The footsteps stopped at the edge of the clearing, just beyond the reach of my firelight. I could make out 2 silhouettes standing perfectly still, watching me. "Hello?" I called out, trying to keep my voice casual. "You guys camping nearby?" No response. They took a few steps forward, and the firelight caught them, a man and a woman, both probably in their 30s. The woman had long, dark hair that hung limply around her face. The man was tall and gaunt. Both were wearing simple clothes, jeans and t-shirts, but what immediately struck me was that neither of them had shoes on. Their feet were caked with dirt, like they'd been walking barefoot through the woods for days. "Can I help you with something?" I asked, standing up now, suddenly very aware of how isolated I was. The woman's head turned slightly toward the man, but neither of them spoke. Then, without warning, she turned and walked back into the darkness of the forest. The man remained staring at me with an intensity that made my skin crawl. In the flickering firelight, I could see his face clearly now. Hollow cheeks, deep-set eyes that reflected the flames like an animal's. "Are you okay?" I tried again. "Do you need help?" His head tilted slightly, almost like he was listening to something I couldn't hear. Then, without a word, he turned and followed the woman into the woods, his movements unnaturally fluid and silent. I stood there for what felt like forever, my heart hammering against my ribs. The silence that followed was somehow worse than their presence had been. I waited for them to come back, for some explanation, but there was nothing. I don't know how long I stood there before snapping into action. No way in hell was I staying another night. These people could come back, and next time there might be more of them. I didn't know what they wanted, but every instinct was screaming at me to get out. I packed up my gear in record time, not bothering with neatness, just shoving everything into my backpack. I doused the fire with lake water, plunging the campsite into darkness. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely zip my bag closed. The trail back to the access road is normally easy to follow even at night. I've done it enough times that I could probably walk it blindfolded. But that night, with only my flashlight cutting through the darkness, it felt like a completely different place. Every shadow seemed to move. Every breeze through the trees sounded like whispers. I'd been hiking for maybe 40 minutes when I first heard it. Footsteps, not mine. They were coming from somewhere off to my right, maybe 100 meters away, moving parallel to the trail. I stopped breathing, listening hard. The steps weren't heavy or fast, just a soft padding, like someone walking barefoot. Then they stopped. I picked up my pace, trying to maintain enough awareness to stay on the trail while scanning the darkness around me. Another sound came, this time from behind me. The same soft footfalls, unhurried but deliberate. I spun around, flashlight beam cutting wildly through the trees, but saw nothing. For the next hour, those footsteps followed me. Sometimes they'd be off to my left, sometimes my right, sometimes behind me. They never got closer, but they never went away either. Every time I stopped to listen, they would stop too. Every time I started moving, they would resume, always keeping that same distance. What freaked me out most was how unnaturally quiet they were, like whoever was making them was deliberately trying to be just loud enough for me to hear. No twigs snapping, no leaves rustling, just that soft, steady padding against the earth. About halfway back to my car, the footsteps suddenly multiplied. It wasn't just one person anymore. It sounded like 3 or 4, all moving at different paces, from different directions. I could feel them circling me, herding me down the trail. I broke into a jog, then a full-on run. My pack bounced painfully against my back, my flashlight beam bouncing wildly, barely illuminating the path ahead. I tripped twice, scraping my hands on rocks and roots, but I didn't stop. The footsteps kept pace, never falling behind, never getting closer. When I finally reached my car, I was drenched in sweat and gasping for air. I fumbled with my keys, nearly dropping them twice before managing to unlock the door and throw my gear in the back seat. As I slammed the door shut and locked it, I peered out into the darkness toward the trailhead. Nothing. No movement, no sound, no sign of anyone following me out of the woods. I started the engine and turned on the high beams, illuminating the first few yards of the trail. Empty. I sat there for a few minutes, trying to calm my racing heart, half expecting those barefoot strangers to emerge from the darkness. But they never did. I drove home that night instead of finding a motel, even though it was a 3-hour drive. I couldn't bear the thought of stopping anywhere. I kept checking my rearview mirror the whole way, convinced I was being followed. It's been 5 days, and I still don't have any logical explanation for what happened. I've tried researching the area, looking for any stories about strange encounters, but found nothing. I've thought about reporting it to the park rangers, but what would I even say? I saw barefoot people in the woods who didn't speak. They'd think I was crazy. The rational part of my brain tries to explain it away. Maybe they were just off-grid hikers or something. But deep down, I know there was something deeply wrong about that encounter. Normal hikers don't silently stalk someone through the woods for hours. I've been camping in Pinewood Valley since I was a kid. It was the one place I always felt safe, the one place that was mine. Now I don't think I can ever go back. Whatever or whoever those barefoot strangers were, they've taken that from me. And the worst part is, I'll never know who they were or what they wanted. I just know that somewhere out there, they're still walking barefoot through those woods. waiting for the next person to stumble across their lake. Story 17. I've been sitting on what happened to me for months now, but I need to get this off my chest. I still can't sleep right because of it, and talking to my friends hasn't helped because they think I'm exaggerating. Maybe people here will understand what I went through. Back in October last year, I was driving around the outskirts of Willow Creek, this tiny town where I live. It's one of those places where everyone knows everyone and nothing ever happens. I'd been feeling restless for weeks. Small town boredom hits hard when you're in your 20s with nothing to do. I've always been into urban exploration. Nothing serious, just checking out abandoned places. And I'd heard rumors about this old house up in the mountains that had been empty for years. That Saturday, I decided to check it out. The weather was perfect, not too cold yet, with that crisp fall air. I parked my car about half a mile from where the trail started and hiked the rest of the way. The house was deeper in the forest than I expected, probably a good 20-minute walk from the nearest road. The trail was overgrown, which should have been my first warning that nobody had been there in ages. When I finally caught sight of the house through the trees, I got that rush of excitement I always get when finding these abandoned places. It was a 2-story cabin-style house, the kind built way before garages were common. The wood was gray from age and weather, and some of the windows were broken. The front porch sagged in the middle, and the steps leading up to it were cracked. The front door was partially open, which I figured was from other explorers who'd been there before me. I pulled out my phone to take a few pictures of the exterior. The place looked perfect for my Instagram, where I post all my urban exploration finds. I checked my phone signal. 1 bar, barely there. Again, should have been a warning. As I approached the porch, the steps creaked under my weight. That familiar smell of decay and dust hit me. That distinct abandoned house smell that's like a mix of old wood, mildew, and something else I can never quite place. I pushed the door open wider, and it groaned on its hinges. Inside, the house was exactly what you'd expect from a place abandoned for years. The front room had an old couch with the cushions torn, stuffing spilling out like it had been gutted. There was a fireplace with a mantel that had collapsed on one side. Picture frames lay shattered on the floor. The photos inside them faded to the point where I couldn't make out the faces. Dust particles danced in the beams of light coming through the broken windows. I moved slowly through the first floor, taking it all in. The kitchen still had dishes in the sink, crusted with decades of grime. A wooden table was missing one leg, tilting awkwardly to the side. Whoever had lived here had left in a hurry, not bothering to take everything with them. Or maybe they had died and no one had bothered to clean out the place. Either way, it felt invasive to be there, like I was trespassing on someone's frozen life. There was a hallway leading to what looked like it had been a den or study. Books were scattered across the floor, their pages yellow and stiff. I picked one up carefully, some old encyclopedia from the 60s. I put it back exactly where I found it. I've always been respectful in these places. I don't take anything, don't break anything. I'm just there to look, to document, to feel that connection with the past. It was getting later in the afternoon, probably around 4 or 5, and the light was starting to fade. I pulled out my flashlight since I knew I wouldn't have much daylight left. I decided to check upstairs before heading back. The staircase looked solid enough, though it creaked with each step. At the top was a small landing with 2 doors, one open, one closed. I went into the open room first. It was empty except for a metal bed frame with no mattress. The wallpaper was peeling off in long strips, revealing patches of moldy drywall underneath. What struck me as weird was that there was nothing else in the room. No dresser, no personal items, nothing to indicate someone had actually used this space. In most abandoned houses, there's at least something left behind. I was about to check out the closed door when I heard it. A sound from downstairs that made me freeze in place. It wasn't the normal settling of an old house or wind blowing through broken windows. It was deliberate, like something had been moved or knocked over. My heart started racing immediately. I held my breath and listened harder. For a few seconds there was nothing, and I started to think I'd imagined it. Then I heard it again. A soft scraping sound, like furniture being slowly pushed across the floor. I lifted my flashlight, pointing it around me in a panic, but there was nothing to see up here. Whatever made that noise was downstairs. I felt the hair on my arms stand up and my mouth went dry. That's when I remembered my cardinal rule of urban exploration. At the first sign of trouble, get out. I moved as quietly as I could back toward the stairs, my flashlight beam bouncing wildly as my hand shook. Each step down felt like it was announcing my presence with loud creaks. When I reached the bottom, I immediately looked toward the front door. It was closed, completely closed. I know. I had left it partially open when I came in. I always leave exits open, another rule I never break. Someone had closed it, which meant someone else was in the house with me. Panic hit me like a wave. My chest tightened so much I could barely breathe. I darted to the door and grabbed the handle, but it wouldn't turn. Either it was locked somehow, or something was blocking it from the other side. I pushed harder, feeling the rusty metal cutting into my palm, but it wouldn't budge. I spun around, pressing my back against the door, and scanned the room with my flashlight. Nothing moved, but I felt it, a presence, something malevolent and watchful. The feeling was overwhelming, like someone breathing down my neck. I've never felt anything like it before or since. It wasn't just fear, it was a certainty that whatever was in that house with me meant harm. I remembered the broken window in what I thought was the den. Without hesitation, I ran toward it, no longer caring about the noise I was making. As I passed through the front room, I swear I saw movement out of the corner of my eye, something shifting in the darkness beyond my flashlight beam. I didn't stop to look. When I reached the window, I used my jacket sleeve to clear away the remaining shards of glass from the frame. It was a tight fit, but fear gives you strength you didn't know you had. I squeezed through, scraping my back and tearing my jacket in the process, and tumbled onto the ground outside. The second my feet hit dirt, I started running. I ran blindly into the woods, in what I hoped was the direction of the trail. After a minute or so, I cut my flashlight and ducked behind a thick tree trunk, trying to calm my breathing enough to listen. That's when I saw them, blue and green lights flashing in the distance, coming up the mountain road. 2 police cars, moving fast with no sirens. They weren't just driving by, they were heading straight for the house I'd just escaped from. I pressed myself against the tree, trying to make myself as small as possible. The police cars raced past where I was hiding, their tires kicking up dust from the old fire road that led toward the house. In that moment, I knew with absolute certainty they weren't there for me. They were responding to something else, something worse. I waited until the cars had passed completely before I started moving again, staying off the trail and using the trees for cover. I didn't turn my flashlight back on, navigating purely by the faint moonlight filtering through the branches. It took me twice as long to get back to my car, and every snap of a twig or rustle of leaves made me jump. When I finally reached my car, I locked the doors immediately and sat there shaking for a good 10 minutes before I could even put the key in the ignition. The drive home was a blur. I kept checking my rearview mirror, convinced someone was following me. For weeks afterward, I searched local news sites and police reports, trying to find information about what happened that night. There was nothing. No reports of arrests, no mentions of disturbances at an abandoned property, nothing. I even casually asked around town if anyone had heard about police activity up in the mountains, but no one knew anything, or if they did, they weren't talking about it. I still don't know what was in that house with me. I don't know why the police showed up or what they found. Sometimes I wonder if I imagined the whole thing, but then I look at the scars on my back from squeezing through that window and I know it was real. I haven't gone urban exploring since that day. The thought of entering another abandoned building makes my stomach turn. Sometimes at night when I'm trying to fall asleep, I swear I can hear that scraping sound again, like furniture being moved across a floor, and I get that same feeling that I'm not alone, that something is watching me from the darkest corner of my room. I drive a different route now, one that doesn't take me anywhere near those mountains. But sometimes, when I'm driving at night and see police lights in my rearview mirror, I get this overwhelming urge to pull over and tell them everything. But what would I say? That I broke into an abandoned house and got spooked? That I felt something evil there? Whatever was in that mountain house, whoever closed that door while I was upstairs, it remains a mystery. One that I'm grateful to have survived. And truthfully, maybe some mysteries are better left unsolved. Story 18. I still can't bring myself to tell many people about what happened to me last winter. I've played it over in my mind thousands of times, trying to make sense of it. Writing it out might help me process everything, and maybe someone here has experienced something similar. I'm a 24-year-old woman who's been living the van life for about a year and a half now. Nothing fancy. Just a converted Ford Transit with the basics. A bed, tiny kitchen setup, some storage, and solar panels on top. I've been mostly exploring the eastern US, but last winter I decided to head northwest to Washington State. Contrary to what most people think, I actually feel safer in isolated areas than in crowded campgrounds. In cities or populated campgrounds, there are too many unknown variables, too many people coming and going. When I'm alone in nature, I control my environment. At least, that's what I thought before that night. It was early February, and I was taking my time traveling between Seattle and Spokane, zigzagging through smaller towns and staying a few days in each spot. The weather was typical Washington winter, consistently gray with rain that varied from light drizzle to downpours. I'd gotten used to the constant dampness and actually found it peaceful. That particular day, I'd been driving for about 3 hours on back roads, looking for somewhere quiet to park for a night or two. Around 4 in the afternoon, I spotted a narrow dirt trail leading into a thick forest. These unmarked forest roads are usually my go-to spots. They're rarely frequented, especially in winter, and often lead to beautiful clearings or viewpoints. I followed the bumpy trail for maybe half a mile until it opened into this perfect clearing, about the size of a small basketball court, surrounded by dense pine and cedar trees. The ground was mostly level, and someone had even created a stone fire circle in the middle. It was ideal. Perfect privacy, enough space to move around outside if the rain stopped, and good tree cover to block some of the precipitation. After parking and turning off the engine, I just sat there for a few minutes, listening to the rain pattering on the roof and watching it create little rivers down my windshield. The forest was so dense that even in the daytime, it created this cocoon of dim green light. I remember checking the weather app. Sunset would be around 5:30, and the storm was expected to intensify overnight. I decided to make an early dinner while I still had decent natural light. I fired up my little propane stove and opened my side sliding door to let in fresh air. The overhang above the door gave enough protection that rain wasn't coming in, and I could smell that amazing forest rain scent while cooking. I made a simple pasta with canned sauce. Nothing fancy, but it hit the spot. By the time I finished eating and cleaning up, daylight was fading fast. The rain was picking up too, so I closed the side door but left one small window cracked in the back for ventilation. I settled onto my bed with my laptop to watch some downloaded episodes of a crime documentary series. Ironically enough, that's when the first weird thing happened. I was maybe 20 minutes into the show when I noticed something strange reflected on my laptop screen. A light source coming from behind me through that small open window. It was brief, just a flash really, like someone had turned a flashlight on and then immediately off again. I paused my show and turned around, but obviously couldn't see anything through the tiny opening except darkness and rain. My first thought was that maybe I'd imagined it, perhaps headlights from a distant road or even lightning, though it hadn't looked like either. My second thought was that maybe another camper had pulled up behind me, though that seemed unlikely given how remote the location was and the terrible weather. I considered going outside to check, but quickly dismissed that idea. It was pouring now, completely dark, and honestly, I felt a sudden uneasiness that I couldn't explain. Instead, I closed that back window completely, making sure all my doors were locked, and tried to return to my show. But I couldn't focus anymore. I kept glancing over my shoulder at that window, even though it was now shut. Around 10 that night, I decided to call it a day. I turned everything off, drew all my blackout shades, and arranged my pillows and sleeping bag. The rain had evolved into a full-blown storm by then. Heavy rainfall punctuated by occasional thunder. Usually I find that sound soothing, but that night it just amplified my inexplicable anxiety. I laid there for hours, scrolling through my phone, trying unsuccessfully to fall asleep. The wind had picked up too, causing the trees to creak and my van to occasionally rock slightly. It must have been around 2 in the morning when I heard something that made my heart stop. Through the rain and occasional thunder, I distinctly heard movement outside. Not animal movement, human movement. Someone was walking around my van, their footsteps causing splashing sounds in puddles. Then I heard what sounded like someone kicking one of the stones from the fire circle, followed by a muffled curse. I froze completely, barely breathing, straining to hear more. For several minutes, there was nothing but the storm. I started to wonder if my imagination was playing tricks on me when I heard it. A male voice speaking in a low tone, as if talking to someone else. I couldn't make out the words over the rain, just the unmistakable cadence of human speech. My phone showed no service bars. I was completely alone with no way to call for help. I stayed absolutely motionless, trying to control my breathing, which felt impossibly loud in the quiet van. My mind was racing with questions. Who would be out in the forest during a storm at 2 in the morning? How did they find me down this obscure trail? What did they want? After what felt like an eternity of silence, but was probably only minutes, I heard a new sound, the crinkling of plastic or tarp outside my side door. Then, 3 distinct knocks on the door itself. My blood ran cold. I didn't move, didn't make a sound. Maybe if they thought the van was empty, they'd leave. The knocking came again, harder this time. Then silence for maybe 5 minutes. I started to hope they'd given up when suddenly, "Sheriff's Department, open up." The voice was attempting to sound authoritative, but something was off. Why would sheriff's deputies be out here in the middle of nowhere during a storm? Why hadn't they identified themselves when they first approached? Why didn't I hear a vehicle arrive? And most importantly, why didn't they announce themselves as law enforcement right away instead of whispering to each other first? I knew immediately it was a lie. Real law enforcement would have approached differently. Lights, proper identification, radio chatter. Still frozen in place, I carefully reached to the edge of my window shade and lifted it just slightly, maybe half an inch. Through the tiny gap, I could make out a dark figure standing by my door. No uniform visible, no flashlight, no cruiser lights reflecting off the trees. Just a dark silhouette against the slightly less dark forest. The knocking resumed, more insistent. "We know you're in there. Open the door now." My mind raced through options. I could pretend to comply and then try to reason with them, but that meant opening my door to however many people were out there. I could stay silent and hope they eventually left. But what if they decided to break in? My third option was to try to drive away, but that meant getting from my bed to the driver's seat, starting the engine, and pulling out while they were right there. The third option seemed like my only chance. My keys were thankfully still in the ignition where I always left them. The driver's seat was only about 6 feet from where I was lying. As the knocking grew more aggressive, I made my decision. In one quick movement, I lunged for the driver's seat, grateful that one benefit of van life is that everything is within reach. The moment I moved, I heard voices outside react. I jammed the key into the ignition, turned it, and the engine roared to life. Through my side mirror, I could see movement, at least 2 dark figures scrambling. I threw the van into reverse, then drive, and hit the gas. As I pulled onto the dirt trail, I heard footsteps running alongside the van. A figure appeared at my driver's window for just a split second. I couldn't make out a face, just the outline of someone in dark clothing. I floored it down the muddy path, bouncing violently as I hit every rut and hole, not caring about the damage to my van. When I reached the main road, I turned toward the nearest town and didn't slow down until I reached a brightly lit gas station about 15 miles away. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely put the van in park. The strangest part? I never saw any other vehicles, not back at the clearing, not on the trail, not on the main road. Whoever those people were, they had somehow made their way deep into that forest on foot, in a storm, in the middle of the night. That fact still terrifies me more than anything else. I reported everything to the local sheriff's department the next morning. They took my statement but didn't seem particularly concerned. They confirmed no deputies had been dispatched to that area overnight, but beyond that, they just suggested I be more careful about where I camp. I never received any follow-up, and I didn't stick around to press the issue. I left Washington State entirely the next day. It's been 8 months now, and nothing similar has happened since. I still live in my van, still prefer remote locations, but I've never again felt that sense of safety in isolation. I'm constantly aware that there's nowhere to run when you're miles from anywhere. I've installed better locks, motion-detecting lights, and an emergency satellite communicator. I'm more careful about choosing spots that have escape routes, but I still wake up sometimes hearing those knocks on my door and that fake authoritative voice demanding I open up. I still wonder what would have happened if I'd believed them, or if I hadn't been able to drive away in time, and I still have no idea who they were or what they wanted from a lone woman in a van in the middle of a Washington forest.